Chapter 1. A Warm Welcome to Signia. And stay out, you filthy beggar. Dominic heard the shopkeeper's voice shout as he picked himself up from the dusty roadway. That made the fourth time this week he had been physically thrown out of a noble-run establishment after he had gone in attempting to sell his salvaged goods. Stupid noble shopkeepers, it wasn't like they were the only ones with a claim to this continent. They just had better weapons and more population than the non-human nations did. The only problem he had with that fact was the small matter of him being born a dragonkin, a demi-human species, more commonly known as sorcerers for the power that they wielded. A lineage of innate magic users with a hint of a magical beast's blood in their veins. In his case, it was the blood of a golden dragon, which had given him the horns that had alerted the shopkeeper to his non-human status when his hat slipped to the side. But also, more importantly, his blood had given him the ability to channel mana for spells without using his own internal reserves, an ability that he had never heard of anyone but the dragon princes of his home nation having. However, his homeland had already fallen under the might of the Dago's armies, and he had fled to Signia. Referring to himself as a prince of wavemates was a bit pretentious these days. Today he was flat broke and hungry, far from royalty, even minor royalty, living in a country manor. Giving up on finding a buyer for his goods now wasn't an option. Perhaps one more stealthy trip to the recyclers would turn up something too good to turn down if he could avoid the guards. He was always good with his hands, and plenty of these rich snobs would throw out perfectly good stuff that was only a little damaged. Change out a watch strap or replace a crystal focus, and the items they called junk were as good as new. But none of the dealers in the uptown district would buy from him, and he had been regretting coming to this city from the very moment that he had arrived. A week of continued rejection hadn't helped his mood at all. Even sleeping in the forest was an improvement on this filthy city. But this was where he needed to be. Signia City was the seat of the Signia Royal Military, and home to all of the greatest minds in the nation, not to mention the wealthiest ones. Alone, Dominic was no match for the foreign army that had burned his hometown and his entire nation to the ground. Not that he hadn't tried. When the Dago's army had come to raze his nation to the ground, dozens had fallen to the childish magic of an enraged preteen dragonkin sorcerer before the remainder of the raiding party had been forced to flee. But he had been too late to save the people of the village. It was a senseless tragedy, civilians wiped out for territory that nobody actually cared about. That was his home, and Dominic would not forget. He was certain that, with sufficient dedication, he could gain enough influence that he could convince the army to claim the lands along their border and pay back every life that the cowards had taken 1,000-fold. Even as he thought it, Dominic knew that it was a childish fancy, completely unrealistic in the real world. But he was still going to try. All he had to do was make it to the royal family's apprentice induction, which should be announced within the month. Well, he also needed a proper apprentice's trade skill stone to prove his worth, then an impressive enough showing that they were convinced to actually hire him. But that was a minor detail. With a position within the royal palace, he would gain the right to propose new ideas for consideration by the army. But more importantly, if they adopted one of his ideas, he could ask for a boon in lieu of financial compensation. Taking control of the lost bit of forest where his home used to be was a small thing for the Signian army. While Dominic wandered the streets of Signia City, he took in the appearances of the people around him. Almost all wore fancy coats and hats. Some were even wearing goggles or gas masks, and steam-driven or magitech vehicles were everywhere on the road, spewing constant streams of steam and smoke into the air. He might have been born in a rural border village, filled with magic and alchemy, but Dominic was certain that he would never belong inside these overdeveloped technology-built cities. Half of the locals didn't even have the decency to power their steam carriages and trucks with magic like civilized beings. To save money on construction, they used coal or liquid fuel instead. Why would any intelligent species do that when they could just solve their problems with magic? Dominic knew the answer to that, though he didn't want to admit it. Most of the humans didn't have any innate affinity for magic. The best that they could manage was to attune themselves to a magical gem or magitech device to gain access to the magic contained within, and then recharge the item with a mana core, either extracted from a monster's corpse or artificially created. But even with all his complaints about the coal burning, there was abundant magic in the city as well. He could see it in the skill gems worn on jewelry, in the street lamps overhead that looked like gas flames but were burning mana. What is going on with the shopkeepers here? Is there something wrong with their brains? Who refuses to buy quality goods at a discount? He whispered to himself as he stood against the filthy brick wall, looking up at the sky for answers. But there were no answers to his troubles, only more questions. Questions and airships, floating on huge balloons and driven by propellers through the sky. His presence was starting to attract attention. A lone young man standing still while everyone else was rushing to get somewhere. So Dominic adjusted his hat over his short golden horns and pulled his hood back over his head for an extra measure of safety as he joined the flow of foot traffic toward what appeared to be a library. Welcome to the Signia City Conservatory. Do you have a pass? Or would you like a day ticket? The valet by the door asked. Dominic hesitated. He didn't have the money for a ticket, no matter how nice the filtered air inside the conservatory was. He hadn't even noticed that he was trembling with hunger until the valet spoke again. Would you like me to call you a doctor? I get a discount rate on call-outs from the conservatory, the young man asked. Dominic shook his head and focused on the world around him. If he was going to find something to eat today, he was going to have to come up with a plan. He quickly read the valet's name from his name tag. My apologies, Mr. Dalton. I should be fine if I can rest for a moment. Is there somewhere to sit here? Yes, young sir. There on your right are the benches for waiting. Dalton replied with a professional smile for the slender youth in front of him. With the hood up and his hat firmly in place, the valet hadn't noticed the horns on his head that marked Dominic as a demi-human. If he had, his attitude would certainly have changed. The sorcerers and their kin had a reputation as troublemakers in the city. They were marked as trouble in general, according to most people. Unlike the techno-witches, the artificers, the mages, and the wizards, all of whom were still humans who could use magic, the sorcerers were part magical beast, and their tempers could be volatile, with a physique to back up their threats. Valet Dalton did his best not to look judgmental as he stared at the stranger. He seemed a bit disoriented, but that could happen if you spent too much time outside in the heat, he heard. Personally, he didn't like to leave the filtered air of the conservatory, and he even paid a premium for an apartment right here within its walls. He was about to extend his hand to assist Dominic, but the boy was already out of reach and moving toward the bench to rest. Dalton couldn't help but notice that, despite the heat, he was still wrapped in the long oilcloth jacket he was wearing. It was battered with years of wear, but quite fashionable, with the brass cog work on the sleeves and the hood's row of brass rivets. Still, it was far too warm to be wearing it buttoned to the neck on a day like today. Dear World Dragon, where have you led me, and why isn't there food? Dominic muttered as he watched the elaborately dressed people hurry about their day. A tap on his shoulder brought his attention back to the present and the flow of wealthy people around his. Excuse me, sir. The benches are for paying customers only. If you're not going to buy a ticket, you need to scram. An older security guard informed Dominic while giving Dalton an annoyed glare for letting this obvious beggar into the conservatory. My apologies. I will be on my way, Dominic whispered, not wanting to cause a scene in this new city where he didn't know any of the unspoken rules. His long strides took him out of the noble district and down the increasingly crowded streets toward the clanging of steel on steel that he recognized as the sound of a smithy. With luck, he should find some answers there. A blacksmith always knew where to find what you needed. You just had to catch them between projects, as they didn't react well to being interrupted. As he stopped to catch his breath and straighten his clothes out in front of the building, Dominic heard the smith talking to a customer. I will get that to you as quick as I can, but steel and copper are both in short supply these days, so you will have to wait until I've got another shipment in to make it from. A raspy voice that he assumed was the smith was saying. Well, make it quick, or I'll find a smith who can get me what I need. Understand, old man? The deeper voice sounded incredibly frustrated in its retort. Then a few seconds later, a large nobleman in a black leather jacket which had brass and silver decorations all over it and dragged the ground when he walked, stomped out of the building and got into one of the waiting steam carriages. It seemed to have mystic runes all over it, but they weren't in any magical language that Dominic had seen before. He might not know how to read most of them, but he had grown up in a village full of techno-witches, dragonkin, and artificers, so he had at least seen the more common ones. The vehicle gave a whistle as it pulled out into traffic, and Dominic sensed the magic that was fueling the furnace of the oddly decorated contraption. "I don't suppose that you're looking for work, young lad?" The raspy voice of the blacksmith asked from behind him, pulling Dominic's attention from the vehicles on the road. Dominic had always been fascinated by the blacksmith's craft, despite his parents' insistence that such common jobs were not for him. Though, with his home gone, such considerations no longer really held any weight. But so far, he hadn't been able to obtain the trade skill core that was necessary to begin his training for the profession. The trade skill cores were a Magitech item that would attune to their users the first time that they were upgraded, and the ability to create them was limited to master level or higher tradesmen. The trade skill core for blacksmiths was one of the acceptable base cores for an apprentice magical engineer, which Dominic hoped to officially become with the next Signia Royal Apprentice trial. The other options for the trade would be Archmage and Runemaster, both of which required a much higher level of difficulty to obtain. The old smith continued, "You look capable enough for a dragonkin sorcerer your age. You don't see many of the sorcerer sorts around here, but I would know the scent of dragon magic anywhere. How about we work a deal? You bring me the materials I need, and I will help you level up your trade skills. I'm sure you know a thing or two about making a deal." Dominic laughed despite himself. Yes, who would know better about making a deal than a refugee prince who had been living in the forest? Other than bartering for goods, he didn't recall making a formal deal in his life. But if he had grown up in the city, then shady deals would certainly have been a part of everyday life. Chapter 2 Pops the Smith. Dominic shook his head as he smiled back at the old smith, with his thick white beard tucked under a long leather apron to prevent it from getting singed as he worked. "As much as I would love to take you up on your offer, I'm in a bit of a predicament. You see, I have no idea where I can find you the materials you need, and they shot at me when I tried to scrounge in the city's recycling yard," he explained. "A bit afflicted in the head, are you? I've heard that happens to the magical sorts on occasion. Never fear. Pops will take good care of you. You're in Signia City, the capital of Signia on the eastern shores of the Dragon Continent." Dominic resisted the urge to roll his eyes at the obvious. Pops sounded like he was going to help him out with his short-term needs, and a smith's helper was a job that should pay very well. "What I need are any items made of steel or copper, and I know just where you can get them. There are daily groups headed out to the forests to deal with the goblin infestation in the regions surrounding the city. Now, I wouldn't dream of telling a young lad such as yourself to go alone, but with a group, even a fighter without any skill crystals or enhancement gems should be fine. As a sorcerer, you should have a bit of the magic of your beast blood, so just blast them if they bother you, and the goblins should be easy work for the soldiers in your group." The burly old blacksmith stopped talking to take a long puff on an ornate silver tobacco pipe while Dominic considered his options. "How many of them would you need to sell me a trade skill core and teach me the basics of the smithy?" he asked. If he was right, and the rules here was similar to the other cities he had been in, then a master smith such as Pops should be allowed to create a trade skill core and teach him the basics through a skill book. A magical item that masters of a craft could create to train their apprentices more rapidly than individual lessons, and attune the trade skill core to the new tradesman. Displaying the trade skill core would show the world they were a real apprentice smith while they practiced the trade to unlock the accumulated knowledge that the master had sealed within the skill core. "Well, it just so happens that I'm in a bit of a hurry myself, so I will give you a discount. If you can bring me 10 fists of copper before the 7th afternoon bell tolls, then I will teach you the basics of the forge." Dominic looked at the clock on his wall, an intricate brass device with exposed gears and an etched silver face, an item far more ornate than he had expected in this part of town. It read 11:15, so it was not quite noon yet, giving him a little over 7 hours to find and kill a bunch of goblins or find somewhere to obtain a bag full of copper. That wasn't quite how he had imagined passing his afternoon, but it would have to do. With a bit of luck, the goblins might even have some stolen money on them, and he could find a proper room for the night after he found something to eat. "Where do I find one of these groups going to kill goblins?" Dominic reluctantly asked. They're right here. You see the steam carriages for the hunting group stage at the station out in front of my smithy? Just go ask around if anyone needs a spellcaster, and you'll find a group in no time. The stout old man was in a much better mood now that he had made a deal to get the materials that he needed. There were plenty of adventurers, mercenaries, and soldiers moving through Signia City these days, but everyone took their materials to the uptown district, where the majority of the magical devices were made, and the shops could afford to pay a higher price. The trade skill core and apprentice smithing book that he offered the dragonkin boy were worth 1 silver coin combined, less than 5 of the goblin's daggers, but it would take 15 of them to make 10 fists of copper as he had requested. He felt a bit bad about taking advantage of the downtrodden dragonkin, but perhaps he could show him a bit of kindness to make up for his stinginess. Overuse of the magical power that came from greater beings was known to periodically wipe some of a young demihuman's memories, which is what he assumed had happened to Dominic, who was actually just suffering from heat stroke. But keeping the coat buttoned was the only way to hide the fact that the clothes underneath were little better than rags, completely worn out and in need of mending. So Pops decided that he would offer Dominic the apprentice's bed at the back of his smithy for a few days until he got himself settled in the city. If the boy never did choose another place, then perhaps he would take in a new apprentice. Dominic looked like he would be much better at dealing with customers than Pops was, that was for certain. If nothing else, the snobbish sorts should bugger off as soon as they saw him at the counter with his horns showing. But first, the boy needed enough strength to actually go hunting goblins. Pops knew just how it felt to go hungry. He hadn't always been a master blacksmith, and the locals hadn't been much more kind to him when he had first returned home to take over the shop as his father got ready to retire. Like Dominic, the dwarven master smith was born with a touch of magic, but without any visible signs of his powers. The locals hadn't forgotten, though, and the combination of jealousy and greed had led to a lot of resistance to him taking over the failing smithy. So, with a smile, he handed the boy a bag of fried pretzels he had purchased that morning and turned him toward the door. Unaware of the full extent of the bad deal that he had made or the actual value of the attuned skill core he had agreed to purchase, Dominic made his way out to the street, where he noticed that there were dozens of people just standing around in tarnished copper-covered alcoves designed to protect them from the direct sun. As he got closer, it was obvious that this was the right place. Group leaders were calling out for members and waving down anyone they thought was promising. Apprentice 3 or higher spellcasters needed. We've got 2 journeyman paladins. One of the group members called out. Journeyman 8 and up, we're leaving in 3 minutes to go hunt dire wolves in the North Woods. Any skill set is welcome. We have a solid core group. Another called. Hey, you in the long coat? We're short on casters, want to come with us? A young boy called from Dominic's left after noticing the single magical gem visible on the amulet worn around his neck. It was a skill gem for minor illusion, and the only spell gem Dominic owned. But being born of the Dragonkin's now virtually extinct royal lineage, he had an innate ability to use an arcane blast at will, and once a day he could use Dragon Flame, though it burned his throat every time. Aside from the spell itself, his arcane blast had a secondary effect, to heal himself a bit when it was used to kill. His mother had called it the Dragon's Blessing, but Dominic was a bit dubious about what sort of blessing required killing to work. The boy who had called out to him was a full head shorter than Dominic, and couldn't be more than 14 years old, but he had some muscle from training, and his gear looked expensive. Dominic could see the magical crystal in the hilt of his sword, so it was definitely an enchanted blade, and those weren't cheap in any city. Dominic, my name is Dominic, he replied, holding out his hand to shake the other boys. Darlys Dovencrun. Don't worry, I don't mind going hunting with commoners. Hop in the truck bed. We're ready to leave. The boy replied in a somewhat haughty tone. These are my classmates from the Signia Royal Academy, Senior Academy Year 1, Class A. I knew it was a good idea to come to the Commoner Square first. You see, we don't have any real spellcasters in our group, only the paladins and an arcanist. Darlys explained as the vehicle began moving with a whistle, and the driver pulled out into traffic. Paladins were warriors who had gotten a skill core from the church to attune them to holy element magical gems and magical devices. It let them use some limited healing powers but didn't hinder their ability to use skill gems and devices that held combat skills and physical enhancements. The Arcanist wasn't a real spellcaster either. They couldn't cast spells without the magical devices that they carried, and an apprentice Arcanist that young wouldn't be carrying all that much. Most likely, the boy they were referring to wasn't even a proper Arcanist, but some nobleman's kid who wanted to become one and had obtained a combat-type magical item using his family's wealth. You could only have one base skill core attuned to you at a time. The paladins had theirs, and with luck, Dominic would have a blacksmith's core by the end of the day. The cores, gems, and magical devices all had limitations on which other ones they would interact properly with, and if you tried to use incompatible ones together, you could end up with none of them activating at all. The blacksmith's core was one of the more flexible options, since smiths worked with all sorts of equipment and materials. The only thing Dominic knew that they couldn't do was use holy or unholy items. No casters? Forgive my ignorance, as I'm not local, but how does that happen? He asked. We're from an academic academy, not a combat academy. We are in training to join the royal court as clerks and assistants, as well as finishing our noble family's training to run our households. Those who wanted to pursue the path of the mage or the clerics instead of taking up the responsibilities of a high noble went to the church or the arcane academy. The boy seated on the other side of Dominic explained. The wagon was a mix of both young boys and girls, but all of them appeared to be 13 or 14 years old and not at all suited to combat. He really should have asked at least a few important questions before they were moving. Going monster hunting with children just seemed like a terrible idea. I take it that this expedition is a school requirement? Dominic asked. A tall blonde girl with an enchanted steel chain mail jacket smirked at him. In a way, yes, but also no. You see, killing goblins gives mana cores, and we can save them to enhance our trade skills in order to get ahead of our classmates. We all need to have our trade skill core at Apprentice 2 to finish the year, and it will only take a few trips out of town to get there this week, while the others struggle through the early stages with actual study and practice. The boy next to her nodded. My chosen trade skill is Inscriptionist, and you can't start doing anything useful until Apprentice Level 3. So I really need to get a head start on upgrading my skill core, or I'll be stuck doing the basics for a year when my tutors taught me all of that ages ago. In the ancient times, it was said that the Assembly of Grand Wizards had cast a spell over the world, the Monster Blessing, that rewarded those who killed the creatures which plagued the land with treasures. They were formed from the accumulated mana in the monsters' bodies, condensed at the moment of their death. The reward could take the form of nearly anything, but for the most part what you got was a monster core, a simple ball of condensed mana that could be used to upgrade skill and enhancement gems. Dominic heard the cobblestones under the wheels turn to dirt or some softer surface as they passed through the gates, and everyone began to gather their weapons. The driver opened the small window between the cab and the canvas-covered rear area and looked back at them. 2 minutes until we reach the drop-off point. Best to get your gear ready now, sirs and misses. It was obvious that most of them had only ever trained with a noble sparring instructor. They had no scars on their hands or arms, no hardened muscles, and the excitement that they had built up was making their hands shake nearly as much as Dominic's had been before he got into the blacksmith's gift bag full of soft but slightly stale pretzels. You look like you've done this before, but your spell gem is still level 1. Did you perhaps train somewhere before your ability to attune matured? One of the boys asked Dominic as they got ready to disembark. He nodded carefully and made up an excuse for having never upgraded his only spell. I was training to be a guard before I came to the city. That wasn't precisely true. He had wandered the mountains after he lost his parents and his home, looking for anyone who had survived, and later anyone who would take him in. Although he could attune magical gems from birth, Dominic had only recently obtained the minor illusion, spell gem, while rummaging through a Magitech scrapyard here in the city. And by then, every mana core from the beasts he had slain in the past had been pawned for food or shelter. He had nearly gotten himself shot by the security guard for his theft, but it was worth it. The girl in enchanted chainmail gave a fist pump in excitement. Perfect. A guardsman's son will know a thing or two about how to handle himself in a fight. Not like you losers. She taunted. Just wait and see. We are going to destroy those filthy green beasts. Darlise laughed. Somehow, that didn't assure Dominic at all. In fact, he was already regretting getting into this carriage almost as much as he was regretting going into the city, and they hadn't even made it to the location in the forest where these students expected the goblins to be found. We're here. Everyone out and be on your guard. The goblins like to ambush as soon as the vehicle is out of sight. The driver reminded them, looking as concerned as Dominic was feeling. Thank you, Jeeves. We will see you this evening back at the academy. Walking back to the city is an important rite for a first hunt. Darlise replied proudly. Yep, they were definitely idiots. Chapter 3, like herding cats. All of the students rushed out as soon as the carriage stopped, waving their weapons around like idiots, while Dominic and the girl in the chainmail went last, neither of them with their weapons out. Just stay close to me so those idiots don't smack you accidentally. My dad is a guard as well. Well, a guard officer. The younger son of a viscount and holder of a baron's peerage himself. The younger girl whispered, Don't worry, I've got your back. Dominic whispered back with a conspiratorial wink. The thought that a girl half his size and years his junior was going to protect him was rather amusing, but she seemed quite confident in herself. The girl might be a Signia noble, but she seemed to have more common sense than the rest of these kids put together, and Dominic was beginning to wonder if this trip was officially sanctioned by anyone in charge of the academy. If it was, then surely there should have been at least one proper guard with them. The majority of the students began to run off into the woods, spreading out and not keeping in any sort of formation as soon as the carriage was gone, and Dominic's fears were confirmed. This was just a field trip to them, and they didn't take the goblins seriously at all. Dominic had spent years in the mountains, often foraging for food when villages had simply run him off for being dragonkin. He was no stranger to the dangers of monsters in the wilderness, and he had spent years learning the best way to hide from danger. Only a handful were moving together with him and the guard's daughter and keeping a proper watch for threats. Eyes to the right. I hear something moving, one of the men in their small group announced. How he could be sure of that was anyone's guess, but the rest of the students were making so much noise that it would be impossible for the goblins not to have heard them if they were even remotely close to this location. The crashing was audible to Dominic only a few seconds later as an injured student ran past them with two goblins chasing close behind. His armor was damaged, and there were signs of blood on his face. Red human blood, not goblin blood. Stand and fight, man. You're a warrior. Where is your sword? The guardsman's daughter shouted, moving in between him and the goblins while Dominic prepared his arcane blast spell. A moment's focus sent a blast of energy that felt a lot like nature magic, with a hint of ancient power, flying out from his hands, taking the lead goblin off its feet and leaving the creature nearly dead. The ranger next to him, who was wearing a light leather vest over his school uniform, let loose an arrow into the unfortunate creature, ending its life, while the second one charged around their attempt to block and continued to chase the fleeing warrior. You idiot, get back here. We can't protect you from that far away. The ranger shouted, but the boy kept screaming and running, slowly losing ground on the goblin, who was not showing any signs of fatigue. Dominic focused again and unleashed another arcane blast into the creature's back, flaying the skin apart and dropping it dead on the ground. Still, the boy didn't stop and he kept running down the road until he was out of sight. The sight had disheartened a number of the students, who hadn't really considered that they might get injured, and Dominic noticed that they were beginning to slip away into the forest in the direction of the city. They had left town with 20 people, which seemed like enough at first, but now that they were here, only 6 were useful at all, and the others were either running away or wandering solo through the woods, shouting and laughing, not realizing that they were in danger. Can you get them back here? All that shouting is going to bring goblin patrols down on them, and we don't even know where they are. Dominic asked the small group that was with him. No, Darlise is a duke's son, and he's the only one the rest of the group will listen to. We're all the children of lesser nobles and knights. He did us all a favor to get permission to leave the academy grounds in the first place. They're not going to listen to anything we say. The ranger boy informed Dominic with a rueful sigh. One of the girls snickered at that, and the boy amended his comment. Correction, we're almost all children of lower nobles. But nobody ever listens to anything that Eleanor says anyhow, despite her being a lesser princess. Eleanor was a silent figure at the front of their group, as well as one of the student group's two paladins, armed with shining plate armor and a sturdy shield paired with a brutal flanged mace. But the boy was right. She was just kind of there, and nobody was asking her to do anything or acknowledging her presence. In fact, with her visor down, Dominic hadn't even realized she was female, much less a princess. He just thought she was another young teen boy. Eleanor, would you like to take the front line with our other brave warrior? You can stop them from getting to the two ranged members, and then... Dominic paused to see what the magical gems mounted into the clothing of the other two were. And then our scribes can throw rocks at them or something. He finished. The two boys who had gotten the scribe trade skill cores looked back at him in embarrassment. The pair had no magical combat skills, but they did have magical blades and some combat training as the children of nobles. Eleanor smiled back at Dominic and nodded, then moved up to the front of the group. It was a good thing that the goblins were all under 20 kilos, or Dominic would have felt awful about asking the princess to lead the party, even if she was a fully armored paladin. They continued on as a group until they heard more screaming and then an abrupt halt to the screech, which was replaced by a soft gurgling noise. Straight ahead, it might not be too late if we can get Princess Eleanor there, Dominic commanded. The group moved up and saw 3 students, 1 boy and 2 girls, on the ground. The boy had his throat slit, while the girls were cowering in terror as the goblins taunted them and slowly moved to encircle them. Eleanor cast her only healing spell on the dying boy as soon as she got in range, and then settled into a fighting stance as the goblins realized that someone was interfering with their fun. Dominic fired off another of his arcane blasts, and the ranger let loose an arrow, each taking down a goblin while the other monsters rushed their frontline defenders. A second arcane blast dropped a goblin, and the 2 scribes ran forward with battle cries to support the girls in front. There's their courage. I knew it was the right call to stay close to the 2 cutest girls in class. The ranger laughed as he continued to fire, pulling arrows out of a leather quiver hung across his back. So that was the reason the boys were so energetic about fighting, despite not pursuing combat-capable trades. They wanted the attention of the girls from their class. Well, they had it now, and the guardsman's daughter even looked a little impressed with them, while Princess Eleanor had the same neutral stance as she had from the moment that they had engaged the goblins. Calm, assured, and experienced. None of which were words that Dominic would normally associate with anyone her age. Chapter 4: Rescue the Children. A particularly agile goblin tossed a crude spear at Dominic, which scraped across the top of his hand and left a deep gouge that burned with whatever toxic filth was on the blade. His next arcane blast tore the creature apart, and the wound quickly began to close, pushing the filth back out of the wound as it did. Now that's some enhancement core that you've got, sorcerer. Being able to use a healing on kill type item must mean that your ancestor was a brutal sort of creature, though. The ranger commented, clearly impressed by the magic. A dragon of balance, actually. Life for life. Dominic explained. That was the way of the world dragon that his lineage was supposed to have come from. Nothing was for free, and even the greatest of gifts often seemed to come with a caveat. For most of his life, Dominic had considered them to be the whims of a bored magical beast, putting conditions on its help for personal amusement. But later, the clerics had explained to him that it was the way of balance. Too much of a good thing would breed arrogance, so the world dragon tempered its gifts to its mixed blood descendants with a cost. He still suspected that was utter nonsense and that his theory about a bored dragon was the correct one, but he never dared to speak up against the clerics, especially after his parents both fell ill when he was 5, and the clerics were the only ones who could help at all to ease their pain. A foreign sense of amusement entered the back of his mind, and Dominic nearly missed with his next spell. He had never heard of a dragon interacting with any of its descendants before, much less directly intervening in their lives without a request or a dragonscale talisman. But as a royal descendant of the mighty world dragon, it wasn't completely unreasonable to think that the creature had taken an interest in him. Perhaps his notion that the world dragon was simply bored and watching its descendants from afar wasn't so far-fetched after all. The 2 warriors were holding the goblins in place, but they were heavily outnumbered now that the other goblins had heard the sounds of battle, and the 3 students they had come to rescue were no help at all. "Get up and fight if you don't want to be desecrated and killed by goblins," the guardsman's daughter shouted at the 2 girls, who were still cowering on the ground in horror. That was the wrong thing to say, as she realized the moment that the girls got to their feet and fled screaming. That was 2 fewer allies for them, and the boy they had rescued was barely stable at the moment. "Does he have a healing potion? Get him to drink it," Dominic instructed the ranger, who was closer to the boy. Alex, you need to drink the healing potion. You're not dead, but you need to drink the healing potion," the ranger pleaded. Slowly, the boy started to focus, then took a small red bottle from his pocket and downed the contents in one shot. Dominic sighed at the waste. That looked like a high-grade potion, and they were only kids without any physical enhancement abilities, much less high-ranked ones that would require that much healing to recover. It would heal him for many times his total health instantly. But on the bright side, he was now up on his feet with his blade back in his hand and ready to fight. "Thank you, Princess. I don't know what I would have done without you," the boy formally declared, complete with an elaborate bow that dropped him down on one knee. He nearly lost his life for his idiotic gesture, and only Dominic's fast reflexes managed to block the goblin's club with a dagger before it made contact with the back of his head. Save the formal announcements for when you're not in combat. Royal Protocol, Section 17, Part 6. Dominic informed him instinctively, reciting a line that he had heard many times before. He had many fond memories of day trips around the village, and the guard training grounds were next to the market, where his parents plied their trade as magical item vendors. For him, it was just common sense not to do stupid formal things in battle, but the group of noble children all looked at him strangely. "How did you know that?" Section 17 is all about the Royal Guard Protocol. Nobody studies that unless they're planning to guard one of the princes or princesses, the freshly recovered boy asked as he attacked the goblin in front of him. Dominic just shrugged and breathed a sigh of relief that the 2 nations' royal guards used the same set of training manuals, and he hadn't quoted some completely erroneous section of the local royal protocol to these students out of instinct. At least his speech seemed to have gotten the boy moving again, and he was no longer an easy target. His trade skill gem, mounted on his necklace, said that he was a rogue, the base skill core for spies, personal bodyguards, and many similar jobs. So he should be decent in combat even if the gem was an apprentice one at level 1. He had clearly been training, and his actions were quick and agile. If Dominic had to guess, he had tried to be a frontline fighter in the previous battle and had gotten overrun by the goblins who were more interested in getting to the girls behind him. The same girls who had fled and left him behind the first chance that they got. Dominic fired off another arcane blast, and the ranger looked at him in confusion. "How is your mana doing? You can slow down if you need to. Nobody expects a commoner with a level 1 spell gem to be doing constant damage," he reminded Dominic quietly. That was a good question. How was his mana pool doing? The arcane blast didn't use any of his body's stored mana. It just pulled it from around him every time that he activated the spell. That wasn't something that the skill gems could do though. It was an ability unique to him as a dragonkin, and he didn't want to draw more attention to the fact he was not like them when these noble kids were being so kind. "I think I will be fine. It's a blessing thing," he replied, not sure how to explain to someone else without at least somewhat referring to his lineage. Shot after shot, Dominic fired his arcane blast at the goblins, taking them out with precision that was increasing with every kill. They were a trash mob to the skilled guards in most villages, and in any case they normally only held value for the mana core that they would grant. Anyone with a trade skill core, a suitable magitech item, or a magical lineage like the Dragonkin Sorcerer could extract it or any other loot granted by the monster blessing. The extraction was done by touching the body, and then a mana core would appear in the person's magitech storage item, or a pocket that they focused on during the process. The magitech storage item was preferred, as it would keep the fragile mana core safe until they wanted to use it to barter or to enhance a skill gem. The only time that the physical gem would normally appear in the hands of the extractor was if the monster blessing happened to have formed an enhancement or spell gem. Those were much more valuable and could be mounted into clothing or weapons and attuned to the user to gain access to new abilities. If the kill granted an item, it was an entirely different matter. It would appear near the body as a solid object if you didn't have a Magitech storage item. Could only appear somewhere that held a larger volume than its exterior dimensions, so you could be in for a hard time getting your loot home if you didn't bring the right equipment. Dominic had one, inherited from his deceased parents. It wasn't of high quality, but it held great sentimental value to him, and currently held all his worldly possessions. Chapter 5 Left Behind. As they fought, the sounds of screaming and combat began to fall further and further behind them. "You, Dominus, or whatever your name was, do you hear what I hear?" the ranger asked. "That your friends have all run away back to the city with the goblins chasing them?" "Yes, I hear it. Once they make it to the road, they should be safe. The caravans travel with guards, and they shouldn't have a problem with a few goblins." Dominic agreed. "Where does that leave us?" the rogue asked. "Killing goblins for fun and profit until mid-afternoon. Then we can go back to town before it gets dark," Princess Eleanor the Paladin explained. The two scribes didn't seem all that enthusiastic about staying out here that long, and Alex the rogue was more than a little paranoid after his close brush with death. The number of goblins they were in combat with was increasing by the minute, and now each of their frontline warriors had 3 of them to deal with while Dominic and the ranger fired at the ones who were just coming into view. "I'm low on arrows. We need to move so I can recover some more of them," the ranger noted. "Alex, can you dart out and grab us some arrows? I will take your place at the front while you run," Dominic suggested. The rogue didn't look happy, but the young man gritted his teeth and rushed out to grab a half-dozen arrows from the closest of the goblins. "Here you go, make them count," he informed his classmate, then ducked under the female warrior's blade to stab a goblin in the heart. "I had more arrows, but they were with one of the other students, a big barbarian clan warrior who can carry way more than I can. He should have rejoined us by now," the ranger informed them. "Could he have run back to the city?" the princess asked while wiping goblin blood from the handle of her mace with a filthy rag during a short lull in the fighting. "It's possible, but he didn't seem like the sort," the ranger sighed, his dark brown hair falling over his eyes. The forest was beginning to fall silent as the goblin horde fell under their blades and Dominic's spells, while even the pair of scribes were putting on an excellent show for the princess and the guard's daughter, despite the fact that they had no magical combat skills at all. "Keep moving through the bodies. Collect the arrows where you can. We will need them to get back home," Princess Eleanor instructed the group, falling back on her years of childhood training to command soldiers and run a household as a minor princess. Dominic was learning a lot about how to successfully interact with others in a group from her style. "There, I see footprints in the mud. Someone large, 6 smaller footsteps, and far too many goblins. There is blood on the ground, but they're moving fairly well as they fight," the ranger explained, pointing at the ground off to one side. "They're also headed for the city. I think we're the last ones still out here," the rogue agreed. They followed the tracks for a few meters when they saw the first signs that they were headed the right way. 1 dead student in arcanist robes and a large number of dead goblins. They didn't need tracking skills to tell them that the group had gotten surrounded here and had a brutal fight, likely at the same time that their own group was going to rescue the rogue. Crap. He was an earl's son. I don't know how we're going to explain all this to not only the academy but the students' parents. The way things went down today, it's unlikely that he will be the only one who didn't make it back," one of the scribes muttered. "You don't seem all that concerned," Princess Eleanor remarked, looking at Dominic. "Well, for one, I am the group's pickup member. I met you all for the first time at the staging lot. It's tragic that the group lost members, but there was nothing we could have done. We saved who we could, and there is no shame in that. Plus, I'm not from the academy. I'm not going to get detention or even a reprimand for this fiasco, and I have no parents for them to contact," Dominic reminded them. Despite his deceptively youthful face, he was older than all of them by about 4 years. How fast you matured depended on your lineage. Most sorcerers would mature much faster than humans, but not dragonkin. Dragons often took a century to reach the stage they would call young adult. So, dragonkin matured and aged much more slowly as well. The princess might have been under the impression that he was younger because he was still using a level 1 spell gem, but for people in his economic situation, it wasn't that uncommon to never have the funds or chance to upgrade more than your trade skill. If the princess were a regular student, studying at a regular academy, the chance to gain levels on her secondary gems would have only come after she graduated. Dominic could only hope that things were the same here, but the way that others had accepted his apparent skill level when they met suggested that a slow advancement as a teenager wasn't unheard of, even for the nobles. Can we at least bring the body back? It's customary for the families to hold a full funeral rite for noble children. One of the scribes suggested. That's an excellent idea. Who wants to cut a pair of long branches? Dominic asked. Why branches? The scribe asked. Eleanor snorted in amusement. Well, you're not going to physically carry Jeff's body, are you? Tie his cloak around 2 long sticks, and you can drag him behind you. Hasn't everyone seen the medics carrying the wounded before? The scribe face-bombed as he realized that he had missed something obvious, then frowned as he realized he'd just volunteered to be the litter-bearer. But he couldn't ask one of the girls to do it. It would be an insult to his dignity as a nobleman, and the 2 scribes were well aware that they were the worst combatants among the remaining students. He quickly got to work, looking for long branches while the rogue and ranger scanned the area for threats. Hey, good luck, cousin. I found your arrows here next to a damaged bough. No sign of blood, though, so I think that it just took a blade to the bowstring. The rogue whisper-shouted from a few dozen meters away. Finally, some good news. There have to be 100 arrows there still. They had barely gotten started when they lost the use of their bowmen. But that means they were down a ranged fighter right from the start, and they might be in trouble if there are a lot of goblins headed their way. We had 2 strong ranged members, and they were without both the Arcanist's devices and the other ranger. They would have had to fight everything up close unless they had another ranged fighter with them. Did we even have one in the class? I don't think so, but they have the other paladin with them. I can sense the use of healing magic on the body, and we didn't bring a cleric. Eleanor replied. Let's just get out of here. I get the feeling that we aren't alone. The rogue muttered, and Dominic couldn't agree more. Chapter 6, but not forgotten. Once the litter was made and the young student's body safely secured, they began to make their way back to the city as quickly as possible, given their group size and the extra burden they were carrying. The tracks that they were following weren't headed for the road, which would bring them closer to a chance to be rescued. They were headed straight back for the city walls. It was more direct, but the only real reason to do that was if you were afraid of luring something dangerous to the road. Going through the forest was shorter, but not in any way faster. We are getting closer. The grass here is still working to spring up after being stepped on. I would say that they're no more than 5 minutes ahead of us now. If we shouted, they would probably hear us. The ranger whispered. Dominic sighed. Or if they shouted, we would hear them, which means they're likely not in combat anymore. If they were, we would be able to hear it by now. Can we pick up any more speed? It would be best to catch up with them before anything happens to either group. There is safety in numbers, and of the students who didn't run to the road, there are still 2 separate groups of us. The scribes nodded and shouldered the litter between them so they could move faster through the woods than dragging it would allow. Eleanor looked around the group to be sure they were all prepared, then gestured forward with her mace. Alex, take the sorcerer and watch our backs. Everyone else, I want at least a jog until we have the others in sight. The young princess ordered. The order did make some sense. They were the 2 most agile out of the group, and the rogue could defend Dominic if anything got close, while he was their only ranged member who could reliably attack without stopping. Using a bow accurately while on the run took a lot of skill, so the ranger wasn't a good choice for fast-moving combat at this age. But the thought of being the first line of defense against an attack and not having any more armor on than the threadbare outfit that was under his long coat was still unnerving. In the villages, he had always been able to count on having a guard somewhere nearby if he had to venture out of the walls to do errands or day labor on the farms, and they came fully equipped, not in worn leather pants and a tunic that he had salvaged from a charity drive. It was made of durable cotton, but it was not much better than wearing nothing if he got attacked. The pair kept a careful watch for any sign of the goblins as they jogged along behind the group, but there was nothing to be seen other than the trees and their own footsteps turning up the soft dirt of the forest floor. If anything was following them, it wouldn't have a hard time of it, and it would know that they were running, as the footprints were distinct even to Dominic's untrained eye. "I hear battle up ahead," Princess Eleanor shouted, picking up the pace until the pair of scribes carrying the dead mage's body began to fall behind. Dominic did his best not to give any sign of annoyance that a full-out run for these young students was little more than a jog, even for a young man like him. They were getting there as fast as they could, and they had already proven that they were willing to fight for their lives when needed. The sounds of shouting and hoarse hooves grew louder by the second, until they burst into the open fields around the city walls, where a large training exercise was going on. There were over 100 soldiers and Royal Guard candidates gathered around a half-dozen terrified students and one muscular young barbarian noble with blood all over his leather armor. False alarm, it's the royal training grounds outside the walls. Somehow, we ended up on the other side of the city. The princess side. They had been following the tracks of the other group, though, so they should all be here somewhere and hopefully rescued without any further casualties. "Princess, it is good to see you safe. Your classmates told us that an outing to gain experience went horribly wrong, and they weren't sure that any others had survived," a guard captain announced, as he rode over to where they were catching their breath near the treeline. "I believe that most of them escaped with minor injuries at worst, though there might have been other losses that we didn't see. We personally watched most of them run for the road, but we were engaged with a group of goblins while we helped rescue Alex, who had been injured while providing cover for other classmates," Eleanor explained. "Let me guess, the Nala twins? I told you those girls would be the death of you, but I didn't mean for you to take that literally." The captain laughed while their rogue blushed. "All right, let's get this unfortunate one cleaned up, and I will send for his parents. The Royal Guard will deploy another team from here since I have your tracks to follow, and there is a guard detachment headed out from the main gates as well to make sure that all the noble children who managed to wheedle their way out of the academy for the day are safe. I don't recognize this one, though. Who might you be?" The captain was clearly looking at him, so Dominic straightened his back and gave him a polite fist-to-chest salute, suitable for the man's status as a knight. "My name is Dominic, and I am new to the city. I needed a bit of coin, and I was hoping to get it off the goblins, so I went with the students when we met at the staging grounds," he explained. "And here I thought they had the good sense to bring a senior with them on their trip." "No offense. It looks like you did all right, though. I don't see any wounds on you, and you aren't showing any signs of mana exhaustion." The captain's look held a fair bit of approval, and Dominic did his best not to give in to the temptation to brag about his skills. A team of royal guards came up and surrounded the princess, separating her from the group, while another team was headed for the treeline, accompanied by a group of dogs and one man in a strange outfit with 4 layers of glowing goggles on his helmet. The fashion here in the city was strange, to say the least, all in dull browns and blacks with a thing for using gears as decorations, but no matter what it looked like to his more flashy sensibilities, they did still have the skills to blend magic with technology to accomplish what they needed to. On the city wall above the training ground, a slender figure in elaborately engraved armor bearing the insignia of the royal family turned away from the scene. Her sister was back safely, and she had many questions that needed answers. Chapter 7, Signia City Bus. "I have arranged a coach to take these ones back to the academy, and the princess will be headed home. Do you need a ride anywhere, young man? I can call you a cab," the captain offered. Dominic wasn't sure how much a cab would cost to get across town again, but he really couldn't spare anything right now. According to his storage cube, the Magitech item inherited from his parents, which exploited the laws of space and nature to collect items from dead monsters and store much more than should be possible, he had 24 copper coins to his name, all of which were gained from the goblins, and that needed to get him some food and a place to sleep after he traded the copper daggers that the goblins dropped into his storage to the blacksmith. If he had been thinking, he should have checked the Arcanist's body to see if his companions had looted his corpse. He might have had something good on him when he died. He was rich, his family wouldn't miss a few little things. Not all of the goblins gave him a copper dagger, some dropped broken spears, and one had given his a piece of tanned leather, but it was enough to fill the smith's order. With a final wave to the guard captain, Dominic headed back into town and started walking. The air in the industrial area of the city was unpleasant, to say the least, and he wished he had a bit of cloth to make a proper mask. But after only a few blocks, he saw a transit stand with an odd bus waiting at it. The vehicle had some sort of external piston drive like a steam locomotive, but it was powered directly by magical crystals with a mage at the helm. The crew drawing on the stop said that it went all the way across town for a copper coin. So Dominic hopped up into the exposed rear seating area and dropped his money in the jar. "We will be off in 1 minute, sir. Schedules to keep and all," the driver informed his with a smile, then returned to watching the clock on the dashboard. The device gave a distinct ring, and the driver slammed the controls forward, violently throwing the large vehicle into motion and totally ignoring the people running toward it. 2 of them grabbed the handrails and hopped on, while the others stopped chasing and walked back to the station to catch the next one, a sight that made Dominic wonder if this was a normal situation for the bus. By the driver's attitude, he suspected that the schedule was more important to him than if anyone was even on the bus at all. The first rider hopped off a few blocks later, not at a stop. He just picked a spot when they were close to the shoulder and hopped off. That was the same way that the next 2 passengers got on as well, with one not bothering to come up and pay, just hanging off the rear bumper until his stop came a few blocks later. The driver didn't mind. He just kept up his pace, and the passengers got on and off at their leisure, waiting for safe moments in the slow-moving afternoon traffic to jump down to the sidewalk. "Thanks for the ride," Dominic called as he hopped over the side in front of the blacksmith, while the driver laughed. "The stop's in 1 more block if you need to catch another ride," he called back as the transport rounded the corner to the meeting area for departing groups and slid to a stop with the brakes locked up. It was probably safer to get off early. "Master Smith? Pops, are you in?" Dominic called over the clanging of a hammer on an anvil coming from the back room. "Come on back. Did you get the copper that I need?" the stout dwarven blacksmith called out from the back of the smithy shop. "Indeed I did. It was a bit of a mess since I didn't pick the best group to go goblin hunting with, but I still managed to get the job done somehow," he agreed, then took out the stack of filthy copper daggers from his storage cube and placed them in a bin by the smith's workstation. Pops looked over the pile of filthy weapons and nodded happily. "That will melt down to more than enough. I hope that you haven't used the cores you got yet. You'll need them to start learning blacksmithing." Dominic wasn't sure how many he had gotten, but he checked the items in his inventory cube, scanning past the trash, items under repair and broken Magitech weapons. 18 level 1 cores, he replied with a smile. As he remembered it, level 1 mana core granted up to 10 points toward a chosen gem, core, or Magitech item. The points weren't really a measured thing, but a convention used to measure how much progress it would cause at various enhancement levels without all the complicated math. That would be spells, combat skills, and trade skills. It was quite the boon, much more valuable to him than anything else he had gained today. They were also tradable items, unlike the spell gems, which were only tradable before they were upgraded. But they were also consumables and in very limited quantities, so the market value of mana cores was quite high. He needed 300 points to take a skill from level 1 to level 2. According to the classroom lessons on spell gems and Magitech items, his mother had insisted on teaching when he was young. 18 goblin kills of your own? I would say that was a pretty impressive day for you, lad. I can't imagine that the students would have traded you theirs. Those cores are quite costly on the open market. Pops mumbled as he washed the copper daggers in a sink full of something that bubbled and hissed when the weapons entered. The acid bath is the best way to get rid of goblin filth. Now we're ready to start slagging them down. Watch close, lad. It will help your smithing skills. Dominic laughed. I don't have any smithing skills yet, remember? Right, the trade skill core and the training book. Here you go. Use that and then watch me work. Dominic wasn't quite sure what the smith meant by use, but when he held the core in one hand and the book in the other, a notification appeared on the cover. Attuned to trade skill of smithing, created by Master Dwarven Smith Pops, will improve the user's skill to Apprentice Smith, level 1. Then a string of tiny words appeared on the trade skill core's polished gemstone surface. Skill gained smithing, Apprentice 1. He finally had a trade skill. Ironically, He didn't yet have the big muscular body to actually suit the smith's trade. But after watching the old man use magic to heat the forge and melt the ingots, Dominic thought that perhaps he might still enjoy this trade just fine. He would be much larger than average eventually, but dragonkin aged slowly, and were often mistaken for elves in their younger adult years. If you didn't see their horns, that was. Now that the gem was attuned to him, it would never attune to anyone else, so it was worthless to thieves, and could be openly worn to show off your status, assuming that you had a properly sized socket in your clothing or accessories. For the moment, Dominic tossed it into his shirt pocket. The attuned gem wouldn't grant his any benefit from inside his storage cube, and trapped against his chest was good enough for the small sphere to be usable. Chapter 8. To make a magic item. Pops, as the smith preferred to refer to himself, stood by the forge with the cleaned copper daggers in a thick crucible made of a stone that wasn't familiar to Dominic. The trade skill gem had called him a dwarven smith, but he was clearly not a dwarf, or at least not entirely a dwarf, as he stood only a few centimeters shorter than Dominic did. Watch closely, boy. What you need to do is fire up the forge, either with magic or with coal, and then pump air through. It's the combination of burning and airflow that gets it properly hot, he explained as he began to work. Now magic does the job better than coal, so the copper will be ready in just a minute. If you have to use a conventional forge, it could take a half hour or more. We are going to have to make it molten today, since I need to make a special blend of naval brass to complete this compass that the customer wanted. I've got the zinc and tin. I just needed more copper. It's become difficult to come by here on the lower side of town, since the resellers in the Noble District pay better. Forget I said that part. I don't mind if you keep bringing more copper directly to me. Most of the clothing makers use it for making bronze and brass ornamentation, and it's on most of the magical items that are made by the wizards, so there is no shortage of demand for copper in the city. They even use it in all of the steam vessels, though that's making them increasingly expensive to build and maintain these days. Now, the copper is already liquid, so we add a third as much molten zinc and a tiny splash of melted tin, and there we go. Give it a nice stir and a hit of mana to blend the alloy, then pour it into the mold. Then we dunk it in the water and let it cool for a few minutes before working with it. Dominic looked around as he waited for the metal to cool. He had somewhat expected there to be weapons or fancy armor of some sort, given the smith's age and personality, but it looked like it was almost all common tools and small useful metal items. There were sewing needles, nails, hand tools, some sturdy-looking metal dishware that would be good over a fire, thick cast iron pots and pans. All were very well made, but none of them were fancy, and Pops had said that they were making a compass today, which was usually a very ornate item, more of a decorative accessory if it wasn't going to be hard-mounted to a ship's bridge. The bell rang, signaling that someone had entered the store, and Pops waved his hand in that general direction. Go take care of that, would you? I need to watch the metal. The prices are on everything, no discounts. There was an odd man wearing a long leather coat over black enameled plate armor, with the same style of bronze gears as ornamentation that Dominic's own coat was adorned with. He had a matching leather top hat with round purple lens glasses over his eyes, but a friendly smile for Dominic when he came out to help him. The old man has a new helper, does he? I need a grappling hook. The target we're looking for is at the top of a cliff. The man explained in a slow, drawling accent. He leaned forward to smile at Dominic, and he noticed that the man had a pistol on either hip and a pair of short swords inside his long coat. An odd combination, but everything about the city was new to him, and common sense appeared to have very little to do with their decision-making processes. I see one over here. 2 silver pieces each. How many do you need for your group? I'd recommend at least having a spare in case one of your ropes breaks on the way up. The tall man stood with a hand on one hip as if examining the quality of the hook, which appeared to be made of entwined pieces of stainless steel or a similarly shiny metal, which were forged into one piece for the eyelet. It's so bright. It will give us away instantly. Don't you have one in bronze? It's much more fashionable, he asked. The old dwarf had said he was out of copper, but Dominic knew that they could dull the hook without any real issues. The soldiers he grew up around did it all the time for blades to be used during evening guard rotations. I could darken the hooks to match your armor. Perhaps give them a bit of pin striping for a small upcharge. he suggested with a wink. Darkened will have to do. I've got to meet my group in 10 minutes, and we forgot to buy one in advance. He sighed, clearly upset that he couldn't get a fashionable bronze accessory. I will be right back. Pops was silently laughing as Dominic walked in with the 2 grappling hooks, but he had the forge ready and a bucket of oil for quenching hot metal. The oil would give it a durable black finish, and Pop's magic cooled the hooks to room temperature in seconds. There you go, only 6 silver coins in total for your custom grappling hooks. Dominic informed the fashionable man with his best smile. Of course, these are perfect. I'm sure the others will agree. I will see you again, lovely young dragonkin. The man flounced out of the shop, and Pops finally let out the laughter he was holding in. You're a good one, boy. Got 2 extra silvers out of him to blacken them. I usually do that for free if they don't like the shiny bits. He commended Dominic. The grappling hooks aren't all that expensive, though, are they? Everything in here looks to be quite reasonably priced, and there aren't any weapons or other high-priced items. Dominic noted. In fact, the hooks were one of the more expensive items compared to the housewares. Only the specialty tools cost more. Nobody makes it this far across town without a weapon. We're too near to the staging area for the coaches heading out to the battlegrounds and wilderness regions. No, what they need are the last-minute essentials, things they forgot to pack, not the things that they carry with them everywhere. So that's what I sell. 100 small transactions instead of one big one. Pops explained. Now watch as I flatten this out and start the engraving. That's where the smithing skill comes into play, and I'll show you a trick that only a few know. Chapter 9, A Unique Compass. Pops had the copper laid out in a dozen small ingots, and Dominic wondered just how large this compass was supposed to be. It should just be a box with a carrier liquid and a floating dial under a glass dome. But he didn't see any glass in this shop at all. What we are going to make today is a dimensional compass, not a ship's compass. It will tell you what plane you've gone to and what direction you need to take to get to the one you want. It's a bit of a specialty item, and not many know how to make it, so my customer has been a bit cranky. His sort doesn't often come out to the common quarters to get anything, much less in person. Once he was finished ranting, Pops snorted with derision, making his long white beard fluff up for a moment. Dominic smiled at his version of a pouting face, and instinctively knew that it must be for his benefit. He couldn't see that old man being that emotional about some odd mage. You don't need to know how to make the whole thing, and you would not be able to make it at your skill level anyhow. But what I want you to remember is this. See how you need to lay all the magical materials perfectly on it in the exact pattern. If you get any bit of that wrong, the item is scrap metal and you'll lose most of the materials. But if you do like this, make a paper cutout that you stick to the copper sheet. You can just paint that crystal paste over the top in the right brushstroke order and call it a day. As long as you don't try to add any extra mana before you touch up all the edges, it's fine. The old man was practically rolling with laughter as he did just what he said, using the template to paint the symbols on the copper sheets until they glowed with magic and the runes engraved themselves into the surface. Now we take our hammer and our chisels and get to work. No hard edges. I use this one here to round them off, then the flat one to make a nice hard bend. Light taps with the hammer. The hot brass is pretty soft. The pieces all interlock like this, all 70 of them, until we end up with this. He had an ornately decorated cube in his hand, slid together with such precision that there were no visible seams. Then he put a bit of magical power into it, and the freshly crafted dimensional compass glowed. A word to the wise. Dimensional mages and demi-humans don't mix well. It's best to stay out of his way, and if he's fool enough to suggest you follow him on a trip, politely decline. If you leave your home world, there is no guarantee that you will end up anywhere but where your ancestors live, you see. If you signed a pact with or descended from an infernal being, you would send your entire party straight to hell, and you'd be the last one to die. Pops cautioned his. It's a dragon. A world dragon. Dominic mumbled, unsure what the reaction to the revelation about his obscure and powerful ancestor species would be. Pops chuckled. I'm not sure the others would appreciate the distinction between being eaten by demons and dragons, young sorcerer. Just because he is related to you doesn't mean he will be happy to see a bunch of strangers showing up on his doorstep. I understand. I suppose that I should probably look for a place to stay the night, now that your lesson is over. I didn't get a chance with all that happened today. Dominic sighed, regretting being so broke. If you've got one more of those daggers or 3 copper a night, I've got a room upstairs that you can stay in. I'll even pay you if you want to sweet-talk the customers for me during the day. Pops suggested with a wiggle of his bushy eyebrows. I've got a few more of the daggers on me. I'll trade you one for the night, and then we can talk about an ongoing arrangement in the morning. I will warn you, though. I do intend to apply for the royal apprenticeships during the next intake. Dominic agreed, then set the dagger on the workbench by the anvil. Perfect. You'll need to work hard to gain some skills if you're going to succeed. Now, come over here and I will show you a bit more about the fine points of smithing. We're nearly out of the etching chisels that the scribes and arcanist sorts use to make their runes and the decorative bits and bobs they like so much. They're not too hard, and I've got a template for the metal. Pops began. He already had a number of chisel blanks formed out of iron. They just needed to be worked into the final chisel shapes and given an edge and a handle. You might think that chisels are a waste of time, but they're the easiest edges to do. Do you know where most apprentice smiths at the academies make their tuition fees? They sharpen swords and tools and repair equipment for their team members and classmates. That ability to fix things is the true value of a smith to an adventuring group or an army, not in making new items all the time, but in keeping the good ones they've got in top shape. Once you gain a few levels and start grouping with the sorts who can afford Magitech weapons, you will understand that a lot of their money goes to just keeping up their gear. If you can do that for them, they will want to keep you around, even if you don't fight much. Dominic smirked at him. I might not look like much, but I'm no pushover in a battle. But he was also excellent at maintaining and repairing Magitech items. He had been salvaging them from the scrapyards to fix and sell ever since his parents had been killed during the invasion of his homeland, over a decade ago. Pops laughed and shook his head. You're not following me. What I'm saying is, why do all the fighting and the fixing when you could do the fixing and only fight when you felt like it? The kids who want to be adventurers don't learn a working trade. They pick a base skill core that gives them an advantage in combat. They learn their fighting style and they go to battle and risk their lives. But a smart young smith can have them do the fighting while he does all the side jobs and gets the real experience. I get it. Make the tools, fix the weapons, then find some suckers to go out and use them to get what I need. Only then I will be the one smelting the copper, not the one chasing after a bunch of noblemen's children who fled at the first sight of goblins. Now you're getting it. So, let's show you the first step. How to make the tools. Chapter 10, Apprentice Blacksmith. They worked late into the evening that night, making an assortment of chisels, hand tools and kitchenware that sold well at the shop. By the time they were done, Dominic had made most of the essentials for a camping trip, and he was actually getting some decent experience on the first level of his chosen craft. Apprentice Smithing Level 1, 190 points. He was over halfway to the second level of smithing, but Dominic was beginning to realize just how basic the trade skill gem he had traded for was. It taught him the very minimum of the basics when he attuned to it. So little that one night in the forge with a competent smith had nearly doubled his knowledge base. There would be a whole journeyman smith's worth of knowledge locked away in the skill core, but at the start you couldn't access any of it. The room that Pops led him to was a simple place, with only a bed and a small table. The bathroom was down the hall, presumably shared with Pops and whoever else was living above the shop in the small dorm rooms. But at least it had a latch on the door and a thick window that didn't leak. The constant burning of coal for the steam vehicles made the air terrible outside, but inside the bedroom, it seemed to be filtered somehow and much cleaner than it had been either outside or in the forge. The answer lay in a simple device hidden on the far side of the bed, a fan with a filter mounted to the front of it. The filter had clearly caught a lot of filth on the back, but the fan was blowing clean air around the limited space with a gentle breeze, making it much more pleasant in the bedroom. It was a magical device and presumably ran on mana, but Dominic had no idea if he could even recharge it. He could use spells, but this was dwarven magic, not human or dragon, so it was possible that he wouldn't be able to recharge the device and would have to ask for assistance when it stopped blowing. Assuming he was here that long. But if one day out hunting goblins was enough for a 2-week stay, then he just needed another day to get enough for the week's food. Or, he could work the shop and find out what Pops was going to pay him as an apprentice. That might be enough all by itself. The thought of food made his stomach growl, but it was now late at night, and he wasn't going to wander the streets after dark looking for somewhere to eat. He would do that in the morning. Morning that came much too soon, with the shops opening at sunrise and the sound of steam-driven cargo carriages whistling and bouncing down the road with their terrible suspension, waking him from a deep sleep. Dominic wanted to go back to bed, but hunger wasn't going to let him, so he reluctantly got dressed and went to the single bathroom on this floor to freshen up. There were fresh towels and a selection of unused soaps in the shower, all of which smelled of various liquors. Dominic shook his head at Pop's version of scented body products, then chose one that smelled of peppermint schnapps. It had a definite alcoholic note to it, but the peppermint wasn't bad. He made his way downstairs to the smithy, intending to head out to find some food, when the scent of roasting meat reached his nose. Pops had 2 plates out on the workbench and a pot of something boiling over the forge. "Take a seat. Breakfast will be just a few more minutes," he instructed. While he talked, Pops dropped a large amount of butter and a mug full of a yellow slurry that Dominic hoped was beaten eggs into a cast-iron skillet, then stirred the pot. "Smithing is hungry work, so we eat heavy in the morning and again at lunch, then snack in the evening or just drink ourselves to sleep," he laughed. The pot turned out to be a thick beef stew, served with scrambled eggs and fresh bread. "That bread comes from 2 doors down by the way. If you need more, just head over there and tell the old woman not to cheat my apprentice," Pops instructed. "Will that get me a discount, or will it double the price?" Dominic asked in his best serious tone, but the aging blacksmith just laughed at him. "With that old woman? Who knows? She likes kids, though, and you're a good 2 centuries younger than she is." 2 centuries? Dominic asked in shock. He had assumed the old woman would be human. That's most people's response, and she will deny it. But she's been an old woman for as long as I've lived here, and I was born in this forge. Pops laughed, making his freshly braided beard dance with the movement of his head. The first customers of the day came in as Dominic was washing his bowl. A group of 5 teenagers in practical leather armor and carrying ornate rifles. No, that wasn't quite right. One of them was in cloth robes and carrying a staff, not a rifle. That must be the group's cleric or spellcaster. "What can I help you with this morning?" Dominic asked politely. "We have need of a very particular sort of tools. I need a 5mm engraving chisel suitable for wood, a fine-point auger no more than 1mm thick, and a silver engraving pen." The leader of the group explained. "Well, I know we have the chisel and the auger. Those are here and here. Let me see if we've got a silver engraving pen in stock." Dominic replied. The first 2 were tools that they had made last night, but they hadn't worked with any valuable metals. "In the storeroom, 3rd shelf, 7th box." Pops called up from the forge. How he heard anything over the noise was anyone's guess, but the tools were right where he said they would be. "And here is your silver engraving pen. That one's a bit more expensive than the standard tools. Your total will be 24 silver coins," he explained. "Can't you cut us a bit of a deal?" the leader asked, while aiming a conspiratorial and entirely too friendly smile at Dominic. That was going to get old fast. If someone was going to treat him like a gullible kid, why couldn't it be some cute guardswoman or a barmaid? He might just let them get away with it. Maybe he should stop shaving and let a beard begin to grow in. No, he hated the scratchy feeling, even if it did make him look closer to his age in human years. "For a fine and upstanding gentleman like you, 22 silver and 20 copper. Dominic agreed, and saw him begin to celebrate before realizing that the price hadn't actually changed. "He's got your number, Nick. Don't worry, we know how Pops is. The price is the price. Hey old man, come say hi," the spellcaster called out. "I can say hello just as well from back here. Bother my new apprentice. I'm busy." The adventurers laughed and shook their heads, used to his antics. "We will see you later. Don't work the boy too hard, you hear?" Pops chuckled at the interaction as he watched from the forge. Young Dominic hadn't realized that the innate magical charisma of dragon blood didn't discriminate, and all humans would find themselves drawn to a smiling dragonkin, like they would be drawn to a puppy. The door didn't even have time to close before another customer walked in, looking hurried and somewhat panicked. "Are you the one named Dominic? Princess Alexis requests your presence to accompany herself and Princess Eleanor on her hunting group for the day," the man asked the moment that he stepped foot inside the small shop. Well, that was certainly unexpected. But Dominic would have rather not gone out again with the children from the academy, even if the youngest princess was the most competent among them. Chapter 11 Royal Request. "You might as well get going. That's not the sort of summons that common folk like us can turn down. Your room will be safe and waiting for you, and there will be just as much work tomorrow." Pops chuckled when he saw his hesitation. That wasn't actually the issue. The issue was that yesterday's mission to get copper daggers for Pops had been attempted with the youngest princess and her classmates, who had left them all behind with the goblins. The request might have come through one of her older sisters, but if this group was anything like that last one, Dominic wanted nothing at all to do with it. In fact, he might be safer off on a journey through the plains with that flamboyant playboy of a mage from earlier. "I guess I will see you later then, Pops. I will bring back whatever good stuff I can find," Dominic told him with a wink. It would pay for his room and board here at the forge, as well as his continued training. At least he hoped there would be more training and not all standing around the front of the shop with customers. Dominic followed the man outside to where a string of ornate carriages on steam-driven truck chassis, all in matching livery that seemed to get great respect from the bystanders, were sitting and waiting on the side of the road. Soldiers and assistants were coming back out of all the shops along the street bringing goods to their carts, while more mounted soldiers on gearwork mechanical horses stood nearby. Using a mechanical horse when there were so many other transport options seemed a bit silly to Dominic, but there was likely an excellent reason for the choice other than the ability to move between trees more easily than a truck or carriage. "This way, young man. The princess has requested you accompany her youngest sister as a personal escort," the butler who had been sent to find Dominic explained as he opened the door to a steam carriage. He could sense that the butler was not happy about the situation, but the man wasn't actively trying to stop it. "Thank you, Lord Butler," Dominic replied with a short bow, and the butler smiled. It wasn't often that anyone remembered that the royal butlers were minor nobles themselves, and not just ranking servants. Such good manners. If only the brats from the academy would learn them and stop teaching the princess's bad habits. He muttered as he closed the door behind Dominic, leaving him alone with the youngest princess of Signia. That alone was generally considered to be highly questionable behavior, but Dominic suspected that they weren't nearly as alone as they appeared to be. Someone would be keeping a very close eye on the situation, in case he tried anything, and to protect her reputation. He deliberately avoided the thought that they were simply treating him as a royal servant, and not a strange man alone with a princess. "It's good to see you again. I heard from my tutor that you had come here last night, and when we stopped out front, I knew that we just had to bring you along again. My sisters were super eager to hear more about your exploits when I told them about yesterday," Princess Eleanor explained. "This looks like quite the group. What are we going out to do?" Dominic asked, gesturing toward the other vehicles and soldiers lined up outside. "We're going out to hunt the goblins again, but this time with a proper group of soldiers. There are currently 2 noble daughters missing from an attack on a lone carriage, and there is a fear that they might be alive," Eleanor explained. A fear they might be alive. Dominic didn't want to think about what that could mean, but his mind was telling him anyhow. "It's best that we do a thorough sweep until they are found then," he agreed. Dominic had often dreamt during his early childhood about a day like this, guarding a princess while riding into battle as magical support behind the guardsmen. These might not be the manor knights of his old hometown, but they were still well-trained soldiers, and he was still the one asked to accompany the princess. Though he was peripherally related to the royal family of his homeland, His branch of the family was so far separated that the manor house run by his oldest uncle was the extent of their holdings and status. So, his ambitions were a bit less restricted than the Signia nobles that he had met so far. All that was missing from the childhood dream was the fancy armor and the muscular build that a princess's personal guard should have. That was the life of ultimate luxury, following a pampered royal lady around. At least in the mind of a child, it had been. Is it just you and the soldiers? Who is leading the expedition? Dominic asked carefully, not wanting to insult the princess who might be his first new friend in this city. My two older sisters, Alexis and Josephine, are at the head of the group. It took a lot of convincing to get them to agree to let me come along today, since I was put in danger yesterday. I don't think that we will get to do much. The guards have orders not to allow it, but we can try, Eleanor explained. Are there any other civilians going along? Perhaps they could be a distraction to keep the guards from stopping us from entering combat. Dominic whispered. Eleanor smiled. There are 10 boys from the senior class at the academy along on the trip. I'm not sure how they will help us, though. They're not going to be willing to let me get into combat, and they're all single noblemen hoping to get their hands on a minor princess to tie their noble houses to the direct royal lineage. But I have faith in you. You will find a way for us to do more than just watch the action. Dominic thought about what they could possibly do. This would be a wasted day if he didn't kill anything for the loot, and he was still incredibly poor. It would be embarrassing to say that outright, though, so he had to find a subtle way to make this trip profitable. What if we pit them against the guards? All teen boys love a good competition, right? 10 of them against us and 8 guards to give the guards a handicap. Whoever does better wins. Then we've limited the number of guards and encouraged them to fight more, which will keep us close to the battle and not at the carriages like a servant guarding a trophy in armor, he suggested. Princess Eleanor nodded in satisfaction with his idea. All right, I will offer the suggestion as soon as we get there, and it should get the boys worked up enough. They need a good excuse to show off their prowess, and they will jump at the first chance to impress me, guaranteed. Dominic snickered to himself and remembered a phrase his mother used to use. The gods have blessed men with 2 heads to do their thinking, but only enough blood to operate one of them at a time. As long as they were focused on the chances of marriage when the youngest princess came of age, they wouldn't think too hard about the chances she was setting them up. So Dominic knew that she could get them to go along with the plan easily enough. The carriages began to move out without any warning, trundling along the street in a cloud of steam and smoke. Dominic pulled the thin curtains over the windows to keep the filth of the coal-burning vehicles in the city out of the carriage and leaned back to enjoy the trip. At least if we do it this way, we will have 8 trained guardsmen with us. They all have suitable skills, right? They're not chosen for decoration, he asked quietly. Not at all. The 8 with us will be my own personal guards, assigned by my sisters for the day, and not city guards like most of the team. Father would never forgive them if something happened to me while we were out, Eleanor replied, rolling her eyes at their overprotectiveness. Well, you are a princess, just not the helpless and dainty one. Maybe they need a good thump on the backside with your shield, Your Highness. That made the young paladin princess laugh. The chance to thump her big sister with her shield would be a long time coming. They were all nearly a decade older than she was, fully trained and in active service to the crown, not entering their first year of advanced schooling. While Dominic rode in a royal carriage to go hunt goblins, Pops prepared an emergency travel bag for him. He wasn't up on current court politics, but he didn't trust the nobles not to attempt to dispose of a rogue dragonkin prince once they realized he was attracting the attention of the Signia royals, who valued magical power and intelligence over lineage. Chapter 12: Eleanor's Wager. By the time they arrived at the battlefield, even Dominic was feeling protective of the princess. Despite her attempts to be a strong and serious paladin and the fact that Dominic knew she was a capable fighter, Princess Eleanor was a very sweet young girl under her facade. She didn't get to do things with friends very much, and the palace servants wouldn't dare to be so familiar with her. So the chance to bring Dominic along once she realized that they were close to his place of work was too much temptation to resist. She claimed that she wanted to prove her worth in battle so that her sisters wouldn't look down on her. But after only a half hour together, Dominic could tell that she just wanted to make friends, even if they were the guards assigned to her and a random spellcaster she met in the staging area. "All right, we're here. Let me make the bet, and you can back me up to get the guards on our side," Princess Eleanor whispered to her new partner in crime for the day. "Good luck." Dominic hopped down from the wagon while the guards assisted the paladin behind him. Formulating his plan, Dominic assessed the group of 10 seniors from the academy. They were all wearing a plethora of level 4 and 5 physical enhancement skill gems, and they all had combat-oriented base skills. It would be a tough fight to beat their accomplishments, even with a lot of luck, but Dominic had promised the princess that he would help her, and he really did need the money. "Boys, aren't you looking dapper today? Might you be out for a stroll in the park? I thought we were going to kill goblins," the young princess teased as they waited around for orders. "Well, now, look at that. The princess brought a friend with her. Is he a classmate of hers, princess?" The largest of the men, standing nearly 195 centimeters tall and wide enough that he had to turn to get out of the carriage door, asked. "I'm a bit more grown than that." Dominic laughed, waving one particular finger at the students, but out of sight of the princess. "How about we make this day a bit more interesting? You are all trying out to be guards, right? Why not prove that you've got what it takes? The 8 of them can take us on as a handicap against the 10 of you, and whoever kills more goblins wins the wager," he offered. "And what do we get if we win?" the big man asked suggestively, glancing at the princess before turning on Dominic with a cruel smile. "How about the winning team gets dinner with the princess? Chaperoned, of course, but a proper sit-down meal to have a good conversation," Dominic offered. That way, if they lost, the boys got a hint of what they wanted. A chance to impress the princess, and if his team won, he got a free dinner. The guards looked shocked at the offer. It was a big event for a lower noble of their status to join a member of the royal family for a formal meal, and the way that Dominic had worded it, the winning team would get the chance. That meant the 8 of them as well. They might be a few years older, but none of the guards assigned to the princess was married, a precaution by her parents and older siblings to help the princess pick a suitable suitor from among the men her family had already vetted. All 18 men answered in unison. "If the princess doesn't object, you've got a deal." The guards' equipment had been carefully improved, with the most important of their enhancements being at level 6 and 7, with a level 10 combat gem visible on the sergeant, giving them a distinct magical advantage. Plus, they were all paladins from the same order that the princess had chosen. Going from level 1 to level 2 wasn't bad, but the requirements doubled with every level. So, by level 10, it took a tremendous amount of work to improve a skill gem by another level. Evidently, the order that the day's assigned guards belonged to was a more open-minded one than most, as they had taken the princess as a proper paladin while she was still young and hadn't left her as some token squire with no trade skill core. That alone was a green flag in Dominic's books in favor of the guards. Entirely paladins seemed like a strange group choice to Dominic, but many of the guards carried short bows or spears along with their blades and shields, so they weren't completely lacking in range defense, and all of the members of their team, except him, could heal the wounded. The students were a fairly well-rounded group with a healing dedicated cleric, 2 mages and 2 archers, along with their melee fighters. They shouldn't have any problems dealing with the goblins that they were expected to face today. The hard part would be finding them. "All teams to the ready. We have our orders. Clear the area of goblins and all other monsters," one of the elder princesses shouted above the din of the crowd with a magically amplified voice. "Yes, Your Highness," the crowd shouted back, and then they began to split up to begin their hunt. "Can you run well enough to keep up? I know that most spellcasters don't have great stamina," the leader of their team asked. "While it might not be my strongest point, I can run well enough and I'm agile. I'm also not weighed down by a load of metal plates, so I should be all right." Dominic shrugged. "Good. No offense to the princess and your escort, but we fully intend to win this challenge." The paladins took off at a jog, running in time instinctively after training with each other for so long. Eleanor kept pace behind them while Dominic took up the rear. At first it was easy, but after a kilometer, he was beginning to hope that they would find goblins very soon. "Just up ahead. There is a goblin village right where we scouted it." Caster Dominic, Stay with the princess in the middle of our formation. It's too dangerous to leave you out here in the open while we raid the village. The team leader instructed. That was just what the two of them had been hoping for. The fight would inevitably force the team to surround them, and then, as the guards spread out, the two of them would get a chance to fight. Dominic wouldn't even have to wait, as he had nearly 40 meters of range with Arcane Blast, so he could take the goblins out as he pleased. The damage done by the spell was outstanding for a young caster, far beyond what most mages his age could manage, and he had confidence that he could kill enough goblins to make it worth the trip. The goblins squealed in their guttural language as they saw the approaching mass of polished armor under pure gold tabards, and the paladins broke into a full-out run, forcing Dominic to struggle to keep his position, much less move forward into the center of their formation as they had requested. The front rank slammed into the goblins, and the creatures didn't have a chance. These were trained royal guards, all using heavily enchanted weapons and armor, and well experienced with the task of eliminating small monsters. Princess, fall in toward the center of our formation. We are going to push forward. Gerald and Tony, you are on the spear duty. Keep the second rank cleared. Everyone, keep the bows stowed until we see a shaman or a lord, their sergeant instructed. Dominic didn't know what a goblin shaman or a goblin lord looked like, but he did know that there were plenty of targets for his arcane blast, and they were going to run right over the corpses for him to loot them. Just a touch of his boot would do, as long as the guards in front didn't get to them first. Chapter 13, What Mana Conservation? Dominic took aim at a goblin coming at them from the side and dropped it with an arcane blast, and then picked out another for his wrath. Go easy on the mana, boy. We will be at it a while, and you don't want to run out before things get too hectic. One of the guards warned him. The princess laughed. We told him the same thing yesterday, but it appears that one of his gems has a blessing, and he doesn't run out of mana if those spells keep killing goblins. That was a good excuse for his seemingly unlimited mana pool, and Dominic did his best to remember it for later. As long as nothing gets to me, I should be fine, he agreed. It did take energy and focus to keep casting, but that was mental weariness, and would recover much more quickly than mana exhaustion would. The guardsmen in the front ranks lit up their swords with bright white light, some sort of paladin-specific attack skill that Dominic didn't know the name of, and began to hack their way through the goblin village. Dominic looked to his right and saw that there was a thick swarm of goblins coming their way. He had a once-daily dragon flame which would create a 5-meter cone of fire and would be perfect for that, but he remembered the warning. Don't use up his magic quite yet because things might get worse later. They were competing against the senior class students, after all, and with a handicap of Dominic and the princess, who were both underleveled compared to either group. So, he began picking the goblins off with Arcane Blast as quickly as he could until they got close enough for the paladins to deal with them. When they did, it became obvious to Dominic just how much the paladins' extra skill and enhancement gem levels counted for. There was a flash of light, and dozens of goblins simply disappeared as if they had never existed, leaving mana cores on the ground, which quickly vanished into someone's storage item, as there was no more body left. Push forward through the village. Let's get this finished and find another. No way are those students going to outwork us. The guard sergeant ordered as Dominic took the opportunity to grab most of the mana cores off the ground. The group of paladins pushed forward into the goblin encampment, clearing the last of the monsters from their hovels before a shrill whistle sounded from the edge of town, and suddenly, there were goblins bursting out of every destroyed building and from under every rock. The whole village was built over a network of tunnels, and the majority of the warriors had been hiding, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Shields up! Surround the princess, the guards ordered, closing ranks around Eleanor and Dominic. The princess was clearly annoyed by the tactic, but it was their job, and they weren't going to risk her getting hurt. Dominic moved back and forth, looking for openings between thick armored shoulders so that he could get a good shot off at the goblin horde which had surrounded them. They weren't charging. They had taken up rocks and spears, preparing to launch a ranged attack on the group. Charge out. Get them before they attack. The team leader uttered just the words that Princess Eleanor had been hoping to hear. Dominic stayed close to her, keeping the paladin only a few steps away so that nothing could get behind either of them, and continued his barrage of arcane blasts. Eleanor charged straight into combat, leading with her blade but lacking the glow of magic that the higher-level paladins were using constantly. Dominic's attacks made up for the princess's limited mana pool against these more powerful goblin warriors, even as more and more of them appeared out of the tunnels. "Did we pull every goblin in the region to us?" Eleanor muttered as she hacked down a particularly muscular specimen of the normally diminutive species. The question answered itself as a group of hobgoblins, the much larger cousins of the goblin species, climbed out of a hole in the ground, revealing their meter-and-a-half-tall bodies behind the lines of goblin warriors and carrying massive clubs, too large for any human Dominic had met to wield. They should all be level 5 and 6 monsters, as ranked by the power of the mana core they dropped, giving Dominic hope that the paladins had this under control, but more and more of them were coming up out of the tunnel network. "This isn't right. There shouldn't be this many goblins in the entire duchy. Clear the area and retreat. We need to report this to the captain," the team leader ordered. It was a great sentiment, but clearing the goblins wasn't going to be easy. There were simply too many of them for the limited number of guards in their team, and they had to protect the princess, who was currently being eyed like a prize by a pair of hobgoblins. She activated a skill that swept the area in front of her with white light, cutting down a whole row of goblins and giving her a chance to catch her breath, while Dominic killed the first few of the creatures to attempt to come forward to fill the void. "Princess, back up and we will close ranks again. They are too close to use their ranged weapons now," the team leader ordered. The hobgoblins were enraged when the princess and the spellcaster were back behind the lines and began to charge through their smaller kin to get to the paladins. They had waited long enough for their chance to fight, and they weren't going to let the humans keep taunting them. Dominic heard shouting in the distance as the hobgoblins closed the distance, but his focus was on one of the large creatures that had been heavily wounded by a javelin made of light. It was bleeding heavily from its chest, and he saw his chance to get some real rewards. An arcane blast to the chest tore the hobgoblin apart, and it stumbled over its feet as it died, trapping one of the smaller goblins underneath it. That was more than he had expected, as the hobgoblin was easily heavier than most grown men, thanks to its wide and muscular build, and must have gotten some advantage from the difference between their power levels. Arcane Blast was an innate skill due to his lineage, and not a skill gem that could be improved as he spent resources on it. But more importantly, if he could get that hobgoblin's mana core, he would be able to stack a lot of experience on his blacksmithing trade skill core and possibly even bump it up a level. Chapter 14: Hobgoblins. With the extra confidence that the hobgoblin had given him, picking targets became much more important to Dominic. While it was considered rude in most situations to steal kills, that rule was more for warriors fighting together. Plus, they were in a rather desperate situation right now, and the more of the large beasts that died before they reached the front lines, the better off everyone would be. There was another wounded one with an arrow sticking out of its eye, and Dominic aimed for its exposed chest, hoping to finish the beast off. The arcane blast fired off on a perfect trajectory, only to have one of the larger monsters throw a pathetically gaunt and wounded goblin in the path of the spell, killing the tiny creature but saving the hobgoblin for a few more seconds before another arrow took it through the heart. Dominic aimed his next spell for a wounded goblin warrior with a large copper blade, taking its life and eliminating the last of the visible goblin leadership. The captain of the guard team pushed forward with a few of his men to kick the bodies, collecting the mana cores and items that might have been dropped by the hobgoblins, then tossed a handful of gems to Dominic. "Here, sort through these and take what you need. It's nothing that we can use," he instructed. That was incredibly generous, as those resources could be sold or turned in for rewards from their order, but Dominic couldn't deny that he could and would use anything that he could get his hands on right now. Spell Gem. Alarm sounds an alarm if the set boundary is crossed or the marked door is opened. Spell Gem. Mage Armor creates a minor magical armor which can be used with or over clothing. Spell Gem. Quality Kibble purifies food and drink from any non-magical poisons, rot, or toxins. Those weren't bad abilities to have gotten from any monster at this threat level. Especially the Mage Armor spell gem, which was almost exactly what Dominic needed at the moment. He activated the armor and felt the worn linen outfit under his coat solidify with magical enhancement. But as more of the hobgoblins appeared, Dominic realized that what he really needed was some reliable area damage. One dragon flame cone of fire a day was not going to be enough for days like this. One of the hobgoblins made it to the line, swinging its mighty club down at the guard in front of the princess, but Dominic hit it in the face with an arcane blast, and the club dropped wide, smashing into the ground and leaving the creature's throat open to the paladin's counterattack. Dominic was beginning to feel a bit like a one-trick pony, but with a whopping one ranged attack spell, it really wasn't an inaccurate description of his combat ability. At least his one trick was a good one. From what he could tell, a stand-up fair fight was not ever going to be his preferred fighting style, even if he could develop the powerful build that dragonkin sorcerers were famous for. But there were some options, even in a melee like this. The team leader was holding off two hobgoblins at once, while the fighters on either side of him kept the smaller creatures away. He took a brutal hit to his shield, and Dominic saw his chance. Minor illusion made it look like the captain was crippled, with blood running down his arm and side. It wouldn't fool anyone who touched it, but it drove the monsters into a frenzy, even as Princess Eleanor cast a strengthening buff on him. It wouldn't be much of an increase at his level, but she was trapped inside the circle and able to recover her mana more easily than anyone else. The team leader didn't even notice the illusion, but the goblins weren't as smart, and they began to swarm, thinking that he was on the verge of death with so much apparent blood loss. Though he couldn't see the reason why, he did see his opportunity and cast Consecrated Ground, an area attack with a long duration and even longer cooldown to protect the group and damage the goblins around them. The holy light burned the smaller goblins' flesh away, and Dominic aimed once more at the injured hobgoblins, hoping for another easy kill and a new chance at some sweet bonus loot. The sounds of battle were coming from all around them now, and more teams from the subjugation effort were charging into the village where the goblins had gathered. The battle cry of the city guard echoed from all directions, and Dominic smiled. With so many reinforcements, they would only have to hold on for a few more minutes, and the influx of green-skinned monstrosities would be dealt with. The goblins charged forward, swarming the paladins, who fell back to keep the monsters in front of them, finally inadvertently allowing the princess into the lineup, and Dominic saw his chance to try out Dragon Fire. 3 hobgoblins were packed into a tight triangle in front of the team leader, and the ground at their feet was swarming with smaller goblins who were climbing them in preparation for a leap that would take them inside the encirclement, where they could overwhelm Dominic and attack from the back. Dominic activated the spell, and a gout of fire poured from his mouth, engulfing the hobgoblins in a horrific conflagration that roasted them into burnt husks in seconds, leaving only charcoal bodies and a cone of burnt earth in front of the team leader. Sudden exhaustion overcame his body for a moment, leaving Dominic winded, but it faded a few seconds later, and he was ready to continue the fight. Now, that was an impressive bit of magic. Good job, caster. The team leader cheered, and Dominic smiled as he caught his breath. There would be many cores to be collected, but more importantly, he could see that the hobgoblins had been carrying a magical item. Dominic darted forward under the attack of a paladin to grab it before the goblins could, and retreated to safety before using the analysis abilities of his new blacksmith trade skill core to identify it. Filthy Dagger, common grade magical item. Adds lingering poison damage on hit. It might not be much, but it was a magical dagger, and it should do much more damage than the ones he had started this battle with. He took the blade into his hand to admire it and looked at the small creatures still trying to overrun the rest of the team. He might as well try out the dagger while he had the chance. With a lifetime of observing and discreetly joining the local guard's training and his determination, even a common grade dagger should be lethal enough in his hands. He hoped. Dominic lunged forward with a straight thrust and found that not only did a dagger feel comfortable in his hand, a result of his faithful practice with them for self-defense, but his agile body made hitting the targets much easier. The blade easily sunk into a goblin's eye and pulled back out before the creature had even realized it was dead. The blade was much easier to work with in these tight confines than his magic was, and he could attack twice as quickly, slicing throats, piercing hearts, and keeping the goblins from overrunning his teammates while the sounds of fierce fighting grew ever closer to his team. Finally, he heard a friendly voice. "Princess Eleanor, it is good to see that you are safe. Sergeant, good work in finding the hiding spot of the goblin attack force. I will be sure to see that you are rewarded when you get back to the palace." The voice of one of the elder princesses greeted them. Dominic saw the team leader's back straighten before he saluted the princess. "Thank you, Your Highness. It is an honor to serve. But tell me, have you seen the senior class students? We had a small bet going with them over who would get more done today." The heavily armored princess laughed at the words, and there was a pause before the team leader began to laugh as well. From inside the encirclement, Dominic couldn't see what was going on, but it seemed that they had won the bet. "They look quite dejected. What might you have bet them? I hope you didn't take advantage to empty the pockets of a group of our loyal nobles," the princess remarked. Her voice was especially authoritative, and Dominic guessed that it was Josephine, but with their visors down and all the flashy bits removed for battle, he couldn't tell most of the paladins and guards apart. That was likely intentional in the matching design, so that enemies were unable to react to individuals' known weaknesses. But it did make life difficult for strangers. Dominic wouldn't even have known it was a princess, and not one of the guard officers had someone not addressed her personally. "Not at all, Your Highness. The wager was that the winning team would get a chance at a fully chaperoned dinner with Her Highness, the youngest princess," the team leader replied. Two deep voices burst into laughter as the other princess came up with her guards. "So that is your taste, is it, little sister? I'm certain that these young paladins will be fine dinner guests once we get them cleaned up. Father won't mind if we chaperone for you, and we can hold the dinner tonight. Bring your dragonkin friend as well, since I'm assuming that he was in on the wager, and we will arrange dinner at the Gorgon Head." Dominic sighed in relief, then froze as he realized that she had addressed him as dragonkin. The royal family of Signia wasn't known to be any more fond of the demi-humans than the nobles were, and as Dominic had heard it, they had refused entry to the refugee nobles from his nation after it was taken. Chapter 15: The Gorgon's Head. Dominic looked to the guard nearest to him for an explanation, as he had no idea what or where the Gorgon Head was. "It's a popular inn inside the noble district, next to the clock tower and the Magitech pistol vendor, if you know where those are. The food there is outstanding, but it's almost impossible for regular folk to get a seat without reserving weeks in advance. There is a private room for use by the royal family, so Princess Josephine will likely set us up there," the guard explained. "Do you have a change of clothes? They have a dress code, and even coming in with a lesser princess, wearing your combat gear might cause issues," the royal guard whispered in response to Dominic's concerned look. Dominic shook his head, but Eleanor smiled. "That's fine. The guards will have packed a spare clothing gem in the wagon. They always do when there are royals going out of the palace. You can have it as a reward for agreeing on such short notice to come with me today. I know you were supposed to be at work and all." Dominic resisted the urge to question what exactly might have been prepared for a trip with the princess. But it might be an item gem with a somewhat generic magical clothing outfit or uniform, and part of the royal carriage's standard equipment. They were rare and exceptionally expensive, but the carriage was prepared for a member of the royal family, and they likely had someone on staff who could just make them as needed. He hadn't seen any such thing since he was a small child. But for a formal dinner with the nobles, he might not have a choice but to wear whatever was provided. Showing up as he was currently dressed was definitely not going to work. He had been thrown out of half the shops in the noble district for his appearance already. Getting banned from the restaurant during his first attempt at a high-class meal was not on his to-do list. The guard closest to Dominic tapped him on the shoulder, and Dominic accepted the small gem that the man offered. Once he had it in his hands, Dominic realized that it wasn't quite as strange of an outfit as he had expected. The outfit was all black with gold embroidery, from what he could see in the gem's miniature display, and didn't look like it was childish or excessively feminine in cut. Given the princess's age, he had feared the very worst about how the spare wardrobe would look. Dominic quickly gave thanks to the creator that it wasn't a dress. The guards would laugh every time they saw him if he wore one of her dresses to dinner, even if some of the noblemen did find such things fashionable. "Princess, might we escort you back to the carriage?" one of the senior class students asked hopefully. His high hopes for the day had dissipated when he realized that their chance to impress the youngest member of the royal family had ended with a resounding defeat, and that the day was being cut short due to the surprising number of goblins they had found and the tunnel network. That would need to be properly investigated. It would be a pleasure, I'm sure, the princess replied, extending her arm to set it on his, while his classmates quietly cheered him on. The carriages had been brought to only a few dozen meters away in preparation to take the royals back to the city, but the young man was over the moon with excitement at the opportunity that it represented, and Dominic hung back while the nobleman took his chance to speak with the princess. Unfortunately for him, all he chose to talk about was money and status, and neither of those things was going to impress her from what Dominic had learned of Eleanor's personality. He was about to follow the princess into the carriage when one of the students stopped him with a hand on his arm. "You're her friend, right? Where did Dawn go wrong? I can already tell she wasn't into him," he whispered. Did he really think that a junior princess who put so much effort into becoming a paladin would be into long talks about money and status? He picked all the wrong topics. Dominic whispered back, then stepped forward to follow the other two princesses and the procession of royal guards back toward the carriages. "We should change before we reach the city limits. The academy will have staff waiting there to welcome me back, and I told them that I was only going to observe and cheer on my sisters," Eleanor informed Dominic with a wink. "Oh, sneaking out to go fight goblins. You rebel, you. But that should be fine as long as this outfit fits," Dominic agreed, making Princess Eleanor laugh. Then he froze as the words he had just spoken sank in. This was a bad idea. Get his head removed from his shoulders for bringing doubt about the royal family's honor sort of bad idea. He was about to exit the vehicle to change when Eleanor spoke again. "I've never seen a gem-equipped item not fit, so I think you're safe. Don't worry about returning that one, either. I was already caught trying to sneak out in it once, so they won't fall for it again." Eleanor equipped a dress of her own, and her armor shimmered out of sight, replaced with the outfit in the gem without a hint of undress. One outfit was simply replaced with another. Dominic followed her lead and found himself in floor-length black robes with long, flowing sleeves and a cloak made of the same black silk, with golden runes all along the edges and a hooded cloak. He looked like the nobleman version of a stereotypical wizard, rather like his own Uncle Dave had in the pictures hung around the manor. His former outfit was in a pile on the floor, so Princess Eleanor must have a magical gem for her armor as well. It only took a second to grab the pile of cloth and toss it into his storage cube. Then Dominic spread his arms to show off his appearance. "Wow, that's not what it looks like when a paladin equips it at all. Or perhaps it is because of my status as a princess. You would be able to infiltrate the Magic Academy as a new student, no problem." Dominic considered that. If they all had the same skill cores and an abundance of spell gems available from their parents, what exactly were the noble mages even learning at the academy? More spells, or was it for trade skills relating to magic? Some of those might actually be useful to him in the future if he had any intention of or ability to go back to school. He didn't think that he would be able to take being stuck in classes with a bunch of kids who were barely teenagers, but if he had to, there might be a way to get some knowledge out of them that would make a trip to the academy worth it. "My sisters are going to be totally fighting over you when we get there. Don't let their friendship fool you. They actually compete over everything. Ooh, maybe one of them will want to claim you as a personal crafter? Then you would always be around the castle. What trade or combat skill have you taken up anyhow? I never thought to ask before." Eleanor continued. "Blacksmithing. I haven't had much time to really study, but I am an apprentice smith," Dominic explained. "A smith? I totally thought you would have taken up calligraphy or runology or something esoteric. Most sorcerers choose something like that so that they can try to craft new spells or fulfill requirements by their patron. Is your bloodline's ancestor a demanding one? Do they still communicate with their offspring with mixed blood at all? Or is that too personal? I don't really get a chance to ask these sorts of questions to many people." Eleanor rambled as the carriage made its way back to town. "My draconic lineage doesn't actually affect me at all until I have to interact with other people, and they notice my horns." Dominic shrugged. "Except in combat, but that part could remain unsaid." Observing was pretty much all that the world dragon whose lineage Dominic's family was sired by supposedly did, as well as granting boons to those who were worthy. What exactly the powerful ancient beast's duty or role was seemed unclear. There was a common belief in his old hometown that it was the world dragon that maintained the monster blessing, but nobody had ever proven that, and the pantheon of gods certainly had influence over it, as they all had their own clerics and favorites. In this part of the world, he had no idea what the consensus was. "Who is your ancestor? Can you say?" the princess asked. "The world dragon," Dominic answered on instinct. "A dragon? That is wonderful. So you're a dragon priest by birth?" "No, that should be a dragon warlock because you don't use healing spells." "How does that even work?" "I've never been allowed around people outside the nobility before, and there aren't a lot of mixed blood nobles." The princess was quite the chatterbox, but it was rather soothing after the stress and adrenaline of the battle. Technically, dragonkin are nobles, or were when we still had a nation of our own. But I don't think that we get any sort of official or even unofficial designation here in Signia or from our ancestors. We just kind of are what we are. My mother worked as an arcanist, and my father was a technomage. Dominic explained, fondly remembering his early days in the village. Eleanor was lost in his thoughts for a while, then suddenly shot up straight. "Right, Wavemates region had dragonkin royals before Dagos invaded to claim Kynwin City and bring the region under human control. I remember that from politics class." "Wait, you said world dragon, right? As in the world dragon, not just any dragon." "Yes," Dominic replied tentatively. "Oh my goddess, you really are blessed. I have only met one blessed of the world dragon before, and he is an immortal at the Magic Academy. His luck is supposed to be insane enough that they banned him from the casinos. They even say that he defeated the last demon lord by himself, and that he can create an army of monsters to do his bidding." "But what brought you to the city? You're clearly not raised here," she asked, staring intently at his face, as if she could detect any sign of falsehood that way. "The village that I was raised in was near the Signia border, up in the hills. It was wiped out in a surprise invasion a few years ago, and I eventually decided that I would build my skills and settle in Signia City so that I could join the royal apprenticeship intake. I know it might sound silly, but when you reach journeyman status as a royal craftsman, you're allowed to make a request. I figured that if I could make a name for myself, I could request that the army go and wipe out those scum that took away my home." "But you said that you met a blessed immortal? How did everyone find out that he was an immortal? When did you meet him?" Dominic finished, not wanting to talk too much more on the subject of personal tragedy. "I met him on my 10th birthday when he came to the celebration in the palace. But the demon lord was defeated about 1500 years ago, I guess. The exact date is a bit blurry because the calendar changed with the change of kingdoms, and they didn't record everything properly. But if you're going to go for the apprentice intake, not only are you going to need to go through as many monster cores as possible to build your trade skill stone, but you're also going to have to leave the city limits and get some real experience on your resume that will make the servants raised by the noble families look like the higher risk option." Dominic couldn't argue with that logic. If you didn't have overwhelming skill and connections for the apprentice intake, you had to have accomplishments. He would ask Pops about it when they got back. Chapter 16: Dinner with Royalty. The carriage pulled up to the restaurant with a hiss of released steam and the squeal of brakes. You know, one day they will update the rest of these things to start using magic instead of coal or wood. The smog out here past the palace is awful, but the commoners would riot if we told them they had to start walking again just to have cleaner air in the noble districts of the cities. Eleanor sighed. "You can only do so much at once. But we should head inside for dinner. I can sense them waiting for us already." Dominic replied with a smile for the normally cheerful princess. He did agree with her, though. If he had to stay in the city, he would definitely prefer that they cut back on the number of coal-burning boilers. Not just the vehicles, but many of the buildings burned coal for steam equipment, heating, and hot water. Dominic checked the runes and the embroidered golden scrollwork on the mage robe that he was given, ensuring there was no damage or wrinkling of the thick fabric, and stepped out of the carriage before offering his hand to help the princess down. There was some murmuring among the crowd as they walked into the venue, but it wasn't loud enough for Dominic to pick up on what it was. Only the generally shocked mood. "They didn't expect us to be here as well. My sisters must have caused quite the scene coming in with a whole unit of the royal guard," Eleanor whispered while smiling and waving at some of the nobles in the crowd. The whole table stood up to greet the princess as she entered the private dining room, and her sisters came over to give her a hug. "Good work out there, little sister. I know that you've tried hard to get the chance to prove yourself." Josephine, the older of the twins, whispered to her before leading Eleanor to her seat. Alexis, the younger of the twin princesses, pulled out a seat between her and her sister's chairs at the other end of the large round table for Dominic and smirked at the young caster's startled reaction. Then she gave a meaningful look at the paladins in the group and back at the chair. "We're trying to set her up with the team leader." The message couldn't be clearer if the princess had shouted it at Dominic, who gently took his seat, nearly forgetting to tuck his robes forward, as he hadn't worn a formal robe more than twice in his entire life. They were kind of comfortable, though. He could see why the mages liked them. The elder princess stepped to her seat, then tucked her long blonde hair out of the way and addressed the group. "As agreed, you have the chance for a chaperone dinner with our lovely little sister. But don't expect us to make it too easy on you. That said, we have found an interesting new person to talk to, and we will be rather busy through the first course. Waitress, the wine, please." Eleanor giggled at her sister's antics. She knew all these people, so it wasn't like she was having dinner with strangers. But the two princesses had already turned away from the crowd to talk to Dominic. "Thank you for serving as our foil to anyone attempting to sit with Eleanor. I won't apologize for using you to keep others away, but I can tell that you don't have that sort of intention toward the youngest princess." Josephine began. No, he had no intentions of a romantic sort with the youngest princess. But he quickly realized that every other man on the mission was looking for a royal bride, and the two older princesses had their own arrangements for the journey. "I heard that you only just arrived in town. How are you liking it here in Signia City?" Princess Alexis asked, her long blonde hair falling around her face now that it was out of the chain mail coif of her armor. "It is quite an incredible place, I must say. The air is a bit thick for my liking, but not much worse than in the forges." "So, you really are an apprentice smith? Will you be applying at the castle and working toward the journeyman's badge then?" she asked with a meaningful look at Dominic's horns. It was clear that she knew something about him already, and had likely looked into his past as much as possible when her younger sister asked for him to accompany them today. Dominic nodded. If he were going to train his smithing, he would certainly want to get it to the standard of a journeyman eventually. He also had many more monster cores on him now, after killing and looting so many goblins, and he could likely advance his skill a second time after using them all up later that night. Perhaps there would be value to upgrading one of the other spell gems as well, but with under a month to the intake exams, he really couldn't spare the cores. "Marvelous. We can always use more smiths in town, especially sorcerers with nimble fingers, to set the gears of the magical devices. The crystal shaping and clockwork are beyond most smiths, but the metalcraft is beyond most watchmakers and inscriptionists." Making magical items sounded like a very lucrative trade, but Dominic wasn't sure how to get into the market. So far, he hadn't had good experiences in the noble district, where such things were typically sold. As interesting as the creation of magical devices is to a young apprentice, I'm still in my first level of apprentice smithing skill. I have a long way to go before I will be ready to move on to such detailed work. The princess chuckled and took out a dagger from her inventory. She placed the weapon on the table, and Dominic looked it over, noting that it was a crudely hammered steel blade with a poorly set gem. The gem had magic in it, though, so the weapon would be formidable despite its poor quality of construction. "What do you think of that dagger?" the princess asked. "Poorly hammered, the gem is only partially set, and I can see the impurities in the steel from here. It looks functional, but nobody would ever call it a display piece." He shrugged. "It was dropped by one of the hobgoblins today. That is the quality standard of the common magical items that an apprentice in the lower levels needs to compete against. I suspect that, with an old dwarf as your mentor, you wouldn't turn out something worse than that even now." Dominic looked the weapon over more closely. All the magic was in the stone. It was only the effect of the magical stone that made it a magical item. He wasn't certain of precisely how the magical gems worked, but in his childhood, magical items were ornate things with runes and special materials, not this crude approximation. Well, perhaps it is possible. I certainly wouldn't do worse on the dagger. I don't know how to make the gems, though. Perhaps I will ask Pops later, once we're done with tomorrow's tools. Dominic agreed. The eldest princess burst into laughter, startling the table. Yes, ask Pops about making magical weapons. Perhaps he will show you when he politely refuses to make them for the royal family. He says his weapons aren't up to royal standards, but we all know he makes the best tools around. Dominic frowned, an expression that scrunched up his face and made Princess Alexis want to tease him just to see it again. Are you that short on weaponsmiths? I thought that this city was full of them, since I've seen forges and artisans everywhere since I arrived. He asked. Artificers, steamsmiths, carriage makers, airship docks, clockmakers, brasswork inscriptionists, and a dozen other specialties that use forges. Yes. The whole city specializes in magitech devices, but only a select few of them make practical weapons. The older princess explained. Magical weapons are much cheaper thanks to the chance to get them from monsters, and crafted ones are in lower demand than a new part for an aging or damaged magitech carriage, you see. So, all the graduates learn to become mechanics and factory workers instead of the daily drudgery of a weaponsmith or toolmaker like Pops. The younger twin added, mischief twinkling in her ice-blue eyes. They hadn't even noticed the wine being poured as they were so engrossed in the conversation, and they certainly didn't notice that their odd trio had become the interest of all the serving staff at the restaurant, who wanted to know who the new mage boy was who had captured the royal family's attention. Chapter 17, A Ride Home. When the first course came out, Dominic realized just how fancy this place was. There was real gold on the trim of all the dishes, actual silverware, and the hostess had mentioned a total of 8 courses. Fortunately, they were all small, so he wouldn't be embarrassing himself by having to decline portions of the meal, but still, the nobles here really went all out. Or perhaps it was because the guards were courting the princess that the older sisters had gone all out at a public restaurant. Not that it was hard to avoid embarrassing himself. Josephine, the elder of the twin princesses, was a boisterous sort, and had a wealth of stories about combat actions and the antics of bored princesses in the palace to keep them going, while Alexis filled in the details and made sure that her older sister didn't skip over any of the embarrassing parts. Dominic kept up polite conversation with the 2 older sisters, while the paladins all did their best to impress Princess Eleanor. They had a much better grasp of her personality than the students had, and Eleanor spent the entire meal smiling and laughing. But eventually, everyone was stuffed and half drunk, so it was time to return home for the evening. Gentlemen of the Order, it was a pleasure to have you all dine with us tonight. We will arrange a ride back to the barracks for you, and we wish you luck on your next mission. The oldest princess informed the group of royal guards, who all made a point to say a formal goodbye to the 3 princesses before following the team leader out of the private dining room. Eleanor, you're riding with me, and Alexis will take your friend back to the smithy. Princess Josephine instructed in a dry tone. Of course, it was a lot of fun. I will be sure to look you up the next time I can get leave to head out of town, Eleanor declared, waving her goodbyes to Dominic on the way out under the envious glares of the other patrons. Their attitudes were making Dominic a bit nervous that they would come to make trouble for Pops. But Princess Alexis had no such concerns. Head up, shoulders back. Don't look like you're going to murder them in public. Remember, half of these people have no magical defenses at all. A single flame attack would wipe out half the restaurant. The princess whispered, making Dominic smile. He bent his arm for her to take, and the princess walked out of the posh restaurant at his side like they were on a date. And he wasn't just some random adventurer friend of her little sister's that she met that morning. Once their ride started moving, she started to chuckle quietly. You should have seen their expressions. You see, us twin sisters are the last ones unmarried. Well, the last ones who are of age. Those floozies have been crashing every event that we attend for years now, and they haven't figured out why they don't have a chance. Dominic smirked at her. So, who is the lucky lady? The princess laughed even harder. Oh, that tongue is as sharp as your dagger. But it's not a lovely young lass, but a book that has captured this princess' heart. My father is against it, so I can't announce it in public, but I have been putting off the news as long as I can. Perhaps one day we can spend a quiet evening at the library, if you should manage to make it through the selection. Now it was Dominic's turn to laugh. The younger twin princess, with her fitness model looks and casual attitude, was actually a bookworm with no interest in romance? That was unexpected. Well, I'm cheering for you. I have heard that fictional characters give the best hugs. Dominic joked. Alexis smiled at some hidden memory. You know, I didn't always prefer books to humans. But being a twin, the number of disgusting offers that my sister and I have gotten from noblemen and noblewomen alike has long since turned me against the idea of ever letting one of those oversexed lechers touch my body. So, she wasn't quite a shut-in, just jaded by the nature of her own existence. It was probably inevitable, given the nature of the princess's existence. But Dominic wouldn't have guessed that they were twins, just going by their personalities and demeanor. When people referred to Josephine as the elder of the two, he had originally thought it to be by months or years, not minutes. They looked very much alike, but so did Princess Eleanor. So the family genes were strong and ran true through all the daughters. The carriage took them directly back to the smithy, and Dominic wondered if there was a way that he could switch back into his adventuring gear when he got close to their destination. A fancy mage robe wouldn't do him any good at work, and the other clothes were his casual wear, as much as the fancy ruffles and silk shirts were the princess's version of casual. It was a pleasure meeting you, young Master Dominic Wavemates. I do hope that we can see you at the Royal Apprentice Intake next month. Tell Pops that I'll say hi when it won't cause any misunderstandings. There are still people following us. Princess Alexis informed him with a smile that made Dominic's heart stutter. Got it. Should I get dropped at the end of the block and enter through the alley doors? He asked. That would just leave you alone with them in an alley, and I really don't recommend that. Nobody here will challenge one of the shopkeepers. The group is too tight-knit. Just head in the front doors, and they will realize you're working there and back off. Have a safe trip back to the palace? Or do you need to do some shopping first? Dominic replied with a smirk, expecting that the palace would tightly monitor the reading material stocked in its libraries. A real inconvenience for a literature-obsessed princess. I think I'm a bit short on perfume. I hear that the shop by the guardsman's tavern has some. She replied very seriously as he opened the door and stepped out. Perhaps she just needed a drink instead. Princess Alexis was rapidly changing Dominic's storybook impression of human princesses in palaces, swooning over news of their husbands' exploits. In fact, he was wondering if the man who spread those stories had ever actually met a human princess. The dragonkin princesses of Wavemates were known to be even more violent than the princes, so it certainly wasn't about them, either. Dominic didn't waste any time getting inside the shop as the lumbering vehicle made its way down the road, but he did notice that there were no fewer than 5 different people, all wearing clothing with noble house crests on it, watching his every action. Pops, I'm back. Do you need a hand back there? Or should I put these boxes of tools out on the shelves? Get the front organized, and then you can come back to help out. It's been a slow day today, so I'm nearly done already. I don't think it will be quiet for long. There was a group of people following me back from the restaurant just now. Princess Alexis gave me a ride on her way to pick up perfume. Dominic replied. Remind them that if they're not shopping, they're not customers. It works every time and we can get a good sale out of them. Pops laughed. Only then did Dominic realize that Princess Alexis referred to him by his full name. Dominic Wavemates, a family name shared by all members of the royal family of the fallen Wavemates nation. Chapter 18 Fleecing Retainers. Pop's predictions about the potential for profit were uncannily accurate, Dominic decided, as the first 4 of the noble retainers entered the shop, pretending to be customers. Welcome, welcome. I knew when I saw you that you were a discriminating group. We have the finest of gear in the city right here for you to peruse. What can I help you find today? He greeted the group, who smoothly transitioned from investigative mode to pretending they were here on legitimate business. The sudden shift in demeanor nearly made him laugh, but Dominic managed to keep a straight face as he made his way out from behind the counter to pull them into his trap. Do you perhaps have a skilled masseuse on your mistress's staff? We have the finest of silver needles for acupuncture here, made to the most exacting of standards, he suggested, They weren't intended for that purpose. The silver needles were for tailoring damaged magical clothing, where other metals could interfere with the enchanted cloth. Oh, I see that you have quite a few prepared. I am not an expert in the art, but perhaps the masseuses might like a set. One of the servants agreed. As I said, a truly discerning eye. They are only one small gold coin apiece, but I can offer you a small discount if you purchase a full set of 50. Only 45 small gold coins for the set. Dominic pretended that he didn't notice when the man blanched a little at the price, but the man didn't want to make his mistress seem cheap in front of the others present, and his hand went to the coin pouch at his hip. The others looked around quickly while Dominic boxed up the needles and wrote up an official receipt for his first customer of the afternoon. Were you out gathering materials with the guard today? I couldn't help but notice that you got down from a royal carriage. One of the others asked. Indeed I was. Then afterwards, Princess Eleanor invited the victors of the day's martial contest for a meal. A fine meal as a reward for fine work, as she said. The youngest princess is truly blessed with her family's signature beauty and generosity. Dominic replied, trying to deflect the topic away from his getting a ride home with the princess' older sister. Indeed, our kingdom has been graced with an entire generation of beautiful souls. The servant agreed, and then gestured to the shelf of tools. Our carpenter requires a new plane. Might you recommend one? Dominic nodded and tried to recall what Pops had told him about the tools. There were 5 different ones, and they all looked very similar but had different uses. Which one does he need? Or do you know what he is making? He asked hopefully. The servant looked relieved that the question hadn't led into a trap of an overpriced bulk purchase right away, as the last one had. He is our in-house furniture maker, and the rough shaping tools were inherited from his grandfather. My mistress wants to replace one as a birthday gift. Dominic stepped over to the rough shaping tools and took 3 out to place on the table. These are the 3 tools most commonly used for rough shaping. A wedge chisel, a rasp, and an adjustable hand plane. Now, these are fine quality and durable tools, made to last a lifetime. But the materials for a workman's tool that needs constant sharpening and sees hard use aren't the most precious. 30 silver will get you all 3. And for another 10 silvers I can have his name or initials monogrammed on them, to make the gift even more memorable. He suggested. It would take Pops all of 2 minutes to add a name to the tool, so 10 silvers seemed to be a reasonable amount to extort the noble spies for the service. The servant held out his hand and shook Dominic's, then handed over 4 small gold coins, equivalent to the 40 silvers. The carpenter's name is Jack. I don't know as that he has a family name. The servant informed him as Dominic wrote up his receipt. Dominic took the tools to the back, where Pops was silently laughing at the forge so hard that tears were running down his face, leaving streaks in the soot. Dominic gave him a smirk, assuming that the laughter was for his antics with the nosy servants. But when he pointed at the pricing sheet, even Dominic had to laugh a little. Monogrammed names burned into handles. 1 copper a line. Pops took the tools and used a hot poker to burn the name into the handles, then gave them a quick coat of oil varnish, bringing a shine to the handles that usually wasn't necessary for a plain hand tool. The heat of the forge dried it in under a minute, and Dominic brought back the tools to face the impatiently waiting servants. We appreciate your patience. We had to make sure these were worthy of being presented as a gift by your lady. Would you like a gift box? I have one here, he suggested. No, thank you. I have the lady's preferred packaging at the house. The servant replied stiffly as he put the items carefully in a pouch. Did you get a chance to meet the twin princesses? Are they as lovely in person as they are reputed to be? One of the female servants asked as she admired an ornate bronze tool that Dominic recognized as a spell-casting focus for technomages. You have no idea, even fresh off the battlefield. I doubt any man in the kingdom could hope to measure up beside them, he replied with a wink. Did you learn about anything that they like? Or were they all strong, silent type? Another of the servants asked, getting excited now that Dominic had admitted to having been in close contact with them. Dominic considered his answer for a moment, and then a brilliant answer came to him. They're quite sensitive to scents, it seems. They had mentioned how they disliked the artificial scents of cheap perfumes, and people who just generally smelled bad. The younger twin princess is not fond of floral scents, and has a preferred scent of gentleman's cologne that she buys regularly, but I didn't get a chance to ask anything about it. Princess Alexis had actually smelled like sandalwood and leather, most likely from her equipment. But if these people asked, the description would send them on a fruitless hunt for the right product. If these people stalked the princess, they should know where she regularly shopped, and cologne was insanely expensive by any standard. Surely, sending some paying customers the other shopkeeper's way wouldn't hurt anything. The rest of the group made their excuses, and they nearly ran out of the shop, leaving Dominic with a laughing Pops. Not bad, boy. Only 2 sales, but you more than doubled the day's revenue. You just might have a talent for this, even if you never set foot in the forge itself. The old dwarf congratulated him as he looked over the shelves for anything that needed to be restocked. Hopefully, whatever perfume shop the princesses purchased their perfumes from does just as well. I believe that the princess was actually headed to the guard tavern, but I suggested that the ones trailing her get new perfumes and colognes that the princess would like from where she shops. The dwarf looked at Dominic, confused. The only scents that dwarves usually wore were from the forge, food or ale. Perfume is insanely expensive. If her preferred shop actually has their own line, they will make a fortune from the nobles trying to impress the princess. Chapter 19: How Pops Does It. The 5 spies for the noble families weren't the only ones who were interested in the royal carriage dropping off a young man at the smithy, and the front of the shop was much busier than usual, with customers steadily arriving right until the moment that Pops came out and flipped the sign from open to closed. With the last customer of the night gone, they settled down into the comfortable chairs along the wall of the smithy, by a small table that was used mostly for planning the next project that Pops wanted to design. The comfortable silence enveloped them, and Dominic took out the dagger that had dropped for him today, carefully placing it on the table so he didn't accidentally poison himself. The princess told me something strange at dinner. These common-grade magical weapons are supposedly as good as what most of the shops are turning out here in town. Are magical weapons that difficult to make? Or does nobody care about them when there is a chance to get weapons free from the monsters? He asked. The old dwarf smiled and picked up the crude weapon. Mostly the second, but the knowledge of making advanced magical weapons is a well-guarded art. You can fumble through trying to create one on your own, but you'll fail dozens or hundreds of times before you get it right, and the master smiths control access to almost all the magical weapon and plate armor recipes. So, you see, even if they wanted to, and could turn out a decently made blade, the majority of the city's apprentices couldn't reliably make it a halfway decent magical one. Most don't even know what the materials are to make a proper magical weapon. Unless they've got an appropriately knowledgeable master and a well-leveled blacksmith corps, that is. The apprentices of real master blacksmiths get access to some recipes straight from their trade skill core as they level it, and at higher levels they can make magical items with a random effect, but those are uncommon grade and better, so they're beyond the budget of most low-level workers and commoner guards. Of course, there are shortcuts like the alchemical concoction that the army uses to turn out pseudo-magical weapons, but those hardly count, and nobody would give a smithy credit for items made that way. Dominic frowned as he listened to his explanation. So, even if I wanted to make magical weapons, there are no recipes available? Pops tapped his fingers on the hammer hanging on his belt as he hummed a soft song and stared at his new apprentice. Well, I wouldn't say that there are none at all, but I've never been fond of letting those greedy noblemen think that they can just stomp in here and demand that I work for them. Dominic laughed. The princess said that you had told them that your skills weren't worthy of making weapons for royalty, but I have seen what they were using in battle, and while it was pretty, it wasn't anything special. Pops smiled back at him and nodded. The really good stuff has skill gem level limitations put on it by the crafters. Letting incompetent children run around with your masterpiece would just be insulting to the smiths, so they build the restrictions into their designs. Most of the ones that drop from the monsters are the same way. They will have some sort of restriction on them. Minimum or maximum combined skill gem level is the most common, but for higher grade weapons and blueprints, skill type, species, and even personality requirements are a possibility. Dominic was fairly sure he was joking about that last part, but Pops looked serious behind that bushy beard. Pops looked toward his forge with a wistful smile that said his thoughts were somewhere else and not in the present situation before he snapped his fingers and got to his feet. "We've got time tonight, so how about I show you how to make a basic magical blade? A step up from the trash they give to the enlisted soldiers, but still a simple one that we can do with just monster cores, if you're willing to forego the free experience for your blacksmithing core. A few cores for the chance to learn something new? I will make that deal." He agreed, and the old dwarf smirked at him. Spoken like a born warlock. "All right, we need 1 monster core at grade 1 or higher for this most basic of weapons. Then we just need to make a weapon to put the enchantment on, and we're good to go," Pops explained as he headed for the forge. Next to the forge, there was a collection of tool blanks, roughly formed and ready to be made into whatever they ran short on. Pops looked at Dominic and then at the chunks of metal and back at him, before he decided on a chunk of steel that weighed about 1 kilogram. "This should be about right for someone your size. Come over here, and you can stoke the forge as I work. Watch close, I will show you how to do this right, and then you can try one of your own." Pops wasn't a big talker, and as soon as he explained the basics, he started to forge the chunk of steel into a blade a little longer than Dominic's forearm, a short sword of a long and slender variety that looked like he was making it a double-edged blade. The material didn't seem like it was going to be enough for such a blade, but Pops kept hammering it wider and thinner, which increased Dominic's curiosity about what he was doing. Once it was extruded to twice the width that Dominic would have considered reasonable for a short blade, he slathered it with flux, which looked like the same powdered borax that was used as laundry soap, and Dominic pumped up the heat in the forge as Pops inserted it again and got the thin metal glowing hot. Then, he folded the metal and pounded it flat again while whistling a happy tune. "A magical blade isn't a farmer's scythe. We need to cleanse the impurities, and I don't have any weapons-grade steel on hand," he explained, then silently went back to work, folding and heating the metal over and over until he was satisfied with the quality. Then he began to shape the blade properly, turning it into the gently curved and narrow blade of a saber. That was not what Dominic thought he was planning to make at all. But as the weapon took shape, Dominic could see that it was a beautiful blade, and light enough that even with his lithe build, he would have no problem swinging it. Pops took a piece of flat iron and made a simple handguard to bend over the grip, with a few thumps of his hammer to lock it in place using the hot metal from the butt of the handguard like a rivet. "Now, hand over the core, and I will show you the trick to making a basic magical weapon," Pops demanded. Dominic handed him one of the level 5 hobgoblin cores, one of the most precious items he owned, but he wanted the very best from this learning experience. Plus, a good magical blade would be real peace of mind next time he was out of town. He hadn't forgotten the princess reminder that he needed to gain some sort of positive reputation before the intake exams. "You had a good day on the field, I see. All right, all that you need to do for a basic weapon is one of 2 things. You can either carve in the rune for the attribute you want to add, or you can randomize it with an invocation. Save the invocations for the priests, though you might have some luck with them as a sorcerer. Today we will use the Dwarven Forge rune for speed." He carefully carved a single angular symbol on each side of the blade, and then popped it back in the forge to heat as he crushed the mana core with a mortar and pestle. Once the blade was hot enough for his liking, Pops sprinkled the powdered core over it like he did with the flux, and smiled as the blade surged with magical power. It instantly cooled as the enchantment took effect, and the steel turned faintly silvery, while the hilt went flat black. That's the true sign that you got it right. A properly forged magical item will take on its own coloration, not just the color of the metals you used, he explained with pride, before handing the blade over to Dominic. "Now, put that away, and it's your turn." Chapter 20, Now Try It. The piece of rough iron that Pops handed Dominic for his second attempt was much smaller, so he assumed that he would be making a dagger for his first attempt. He had made a number of edge tools already, but they had just been shaped out of the blocks that Pops had already brought up to his standard for tool making. He hadn't had to try to refine the metals before, and he was overjoyed that Pops didn't want him to try to bring the metals down from or to a workable standard. For times he folded it before the crudely smelted piece of metal was beginning to look decent for use on tools, and then another 6 attempts before it was starting to look like a decent carbon steel, the way that a good knife should. Then he began to work the metal into a simple dirk, with the handle and crossbar integrated as a single piece. That was similar to what Pops had done for the saber, to create the landing to mount the handguard, and Dominic found that once the blade was formed into a simple wedge dirk that he actually enjoyed hammering the curved shape into the handle's grip, forming ridges so it wouldn't slip out of the hand when it was wet with blood. It was a lesson he learned the first time that he had to help his dad skin an animal for dinner. Where he grew up, most would wrap their handles with wire for that reason, allowing the slippery fluid to flow down from the surface without impeding the user's grip. A round of dimples completed the look, and Dominic was satisfied that he wouldn't be embarrassed to take out this dagger anywhere. Now for the rune. Pops instructed his with a gesture to the diagram he had made on the chalkboard by the forge. Very carefully, Dominic carved the rune on each side of the blade, and took out a level 1 goblin core to crush while the blade heated enough for the last step. Pops smirked at Dominic as he carefully crushed the least valuable of his cores for the attempt before taking the dagger back out of the flames and crossing his fingers for luck before sprinkling the dust over the blade. Unnoticed by Dominic, as the item was in his pocket, words appeared on his trade skill core as the enchantment finished. Creation successful. Recipe learned. Blade of Swiftness. Skill advanced blacksmithing apprentice level 2. Just like the saber, the dagger had turned slightly silvered, with a blackened metal hilt, but it wasn't as shiny and the feeling of magic on the item was weaker. Not shabby at all. It might only be a level 1 dagger of swiftness, but the nobles would pay good money for a dagger that pretty. You have a talent for art and sculpture, apprentice. Pops laughed as he picked up the cooled metal between his fingers to examine it with a critical eye. Dominic sighed in relief and slumped against the bench, exhausted from his work, and only now realizing that he had been at it for hours, and it was nearly midnight. Pops handed the dagger back and Dominic put it away into his storage cube, satisfied that he had just greatly increased his combat abilities with a single evening's work. Just how much would this sort of weapon sell for? Dominic asked curiously. Usually, a common weapon sells for 100 silvers per magical level, uncommon for 1,000 a level. Anything more precious than that doesn't sell for money. It trades for something else of value. Dominic examined the 2 new weapons using the magic of the trade skill core, and his eyes opened in shock at the descriptions. Dagger of Swiftness, uncommon dagger level 1. Saber of Swiftness, uncommon saber level 5. These 2 weapons were worth much more than the monster cores that he had made them with, and even if he had used more valuable materials for the blades, it would still be a large profit to make them. With that sort of prices, why don't you sell them? The old dwarf shook his head. Once you start selling magic weapons, you can't stop. They'll always come to you for more and more, and they won't stop until they've worked you to the bone without so much as a thank you. It's better that you make your own and let the others hunt for theirs. The same goes for armor, but a spellcaster normally can't use plate, and I don't do leatherworking, it's not my thing. Is there some sort of book to learn the runes from to do different enchantments? Dominic asked hopefully. Pop's beard wiggled as he laughed. You've got expensive tastes, boyo. The dwarven forge runes are the secret to our success as forge masters. There is no written book, we memorize the entire language and never write it out on anything permanent except on our work, where it will vanish the moment that the enchantment is finished. He was right, there was no sign of the rune that he had written on the dagger, and if anyone else looked at it, they would only see the effect, not the rune that created it. Pops had also erased it from the chalkboard, but after the success, the rune was engraved in Dominic's memory, allowing him to create another blade with the swiftness aspect again in the future. So, learning the whole language is one of the secret requirements for dwarven smiths to advance, is it? I am honored that you have taught me something so precious to you. He replied with a polite bow to his teacher, then straightened quickly as his hair nearly swung into the forge. You're a quick learner, and you made great progress in your smithing. Tomorrow we will get you a proper welcoming gift made. But for now, go to bed. Pops replied with a smile. A warm bed sounded like a wonderful idea after spending so much time in front of the forge. The heat seemed to have seeped into his bones, and standing away from the fire felt cold. It was easy to see why the old man was known to sleep in the workshop, where it was sweltering hot. Once you were used to it, anywhere else was just uncomfortably cold.